We are back from recess. Today is Thursday, August 24th, 2017. This is day 2 of the Physical Therapy Board of California. We're meeting in the Department of Consumer Affairs hearing room located at 2005 Evergreen Street in Sacramento. Could we please have roll call?
Katerina Ellaby,
Present.
Alicia Benedict,
Yes.
Deborah Alonso,
Yes.
Jesus Dominguez,
Present.
Daniel Drummer,
Present.
Tanya McMillian,
Here.
TJ Watkins.
Present.
All members are present and the board has a quorum.
Thank you, Brooke. We'll begin with agenda item number 4B, the 2018 meeting calendar. This is in...
So to continue off of our discussions yesterday, board staff has prepared a handout, what we're calling Plan B for the 2018 meeting calendar. And now that all members are in attendance, we'd like to get feedback and input and maybe a consideration of a change if the board warrants so. Some of the things that we discussed yesterday, just to kind of go over it again, is in consideration of the calendar, board discussed things like the difficulty in attaining resources from DCA because a number of the DCA boards are scheduling their calendar, their quarterly board meetings within the same week, even same day. So it makes it difficult sometimes to find rooms or webcast services. Also, at the quarterly meetings, we're having difficulty because of data collection with new databases, Breeze and Fiscal and that kind of thing. So on Plan B, what we've proposed is moving the quarterly calendar back by 1 month, which might make it a little bit easier for us to collect that data. It will definitely make it easier for us to find resources for meetings and webcasting services. It lines up a little bit better with some of the stakeholder calendar dates like CPTA, FSBPT, and APTA. We also consider the legislative calendar and the academic calendar for graduation dates and those kind of things. So what you have before you is what we've worked on so far. There are a couple things to highlight. We are planning on doing a strategic plan meeting in the first quarter of next year, which would necessitate a 3-day meeting. And we had a discussion regarding the difference between Wednesday, Thursday, or Thursday, Friday. And I think the consensus thus far is if we were to do a Thursday, Friday, we would do it here in Sacramento, but not traveling on the road. And that's where we are so far.
That's where we are.
I'm fine with the proposal.
Jason, just to clarify, the strategic plan meeting would be full board,
Correct.
and so that third day would be just an additional board meeting day.
Correct.
Okay.
And if-
Tentatively on the calendar, we've marked it as the 13th of the proposal in Plan B. But again, that's, I don't want to use the word negotiable, but it could be changed. I mean, if you wanted to do that on a Friday or shift the days or something like that, that is a Sacramento, scheduled as a Sacramento meeting. And so if you wanted to do strategic plan on Wednesday, but the, normal board business on Thursday and Friday, so be it.
You're talking about March 2018?
Correct.
And so just to be clear, the calendar that was presented in the agenda book did not yet include
That's correct.
strategic plan meeting.
That's correct. And I'll just float this as kind of an idea too. The strategic plan does not have to be attached to a board meeting. If you wanted to break it up a little bit because maybe 3 days is too much to take within a given week, we could consider that as well. So if you wanted to do strategic plan in April or in February and have it just stand alone by itself, in our discussions with Solid, some, depending on the board, strategic plan may be a 1 or a 2 day meeting. It depends on the agreement of facilitation was solid.
Can you tell me what the student conclave is, and does the board normally attend that? I'm just looking at where it is in that week.
Sure. So Student Conclave is a presentation put on by CPTA for future applicants to the PT and PTA profession. This year's Student Conclave, the board's applications and licensing manager, Sarah Conley, and I went and provided presentations. It's not necessary, but you are certainly welcome to come as members in representation of the board. But we put it on the calendar for informational purposes, just to kind of give you an idea that where that is located, we'd still have another travel a travel obligation very close to that area.
So it's not here in Sacramento then?
It moves.
Oh, okay.
It moves. This year it was in Fresno.
And the March 2018 will be at Mount St. Mary's University in Los Angeles.
Shalon or Doheny campus? Do you know?
Doheny.
I hear some interest in, yeah?
I would love a future board meeting at the Shalon campus sometime.
So why don't we go around and see how everybody's feeling about this? And staff, if you would like to potentially move the March meeting so it's not right up against that event,
As it's presented now, I think we're still comfortable with
you're
that.
comfortable with it, even if we were to have a Wednesday through Friday meeting that week?
And it's in Los Angeles.
And it's in Los Angeles, yeah.
Well, so if you, 7th, 8th, 21st, 22nd, I mean, there are options available.
Okay. Also have another question about the strategic planning session.
Mhm.
Is that gonna require any voting to approve? Are we just having the session, the facilitator's gonna come back to us with a draft of the plan, and then we work with that in
Correct,
future?
and we'll work with it in
Okay,
subsequent meetings.
so it
to
doesn't
that.
necessarily need to be attached to a board meeting for any
It doesn't.
reason, other than convenience and travel?
It doesn't, and you could even look at it that it's still going to be a publicly noticed meeting to have all 7 of you do a strategic plan, so it will be a meeting in and of its own.
Mhm.
And so board business could still be conducted there if it was necessary.
I see. Yes, so let's do a straw poll. I will begin. I'm okay with having the strategic planning session as a standalone or attached to the March meeting, no preference there. I'm also okay with the Thursday, Friday in Sacramento, the Wednesday, Thursdays away. The calendar that's been proposed, I'm comfortable with those exceptions. So I really leave it to the rest of the board to make the determination.
Board, before you go too far with that, just maybe one more point of consideration. I could have, as an agenda item at the March meeting, have Solid do a presentation on their facilitation of the strategic plan, because I've been informed that their services are much more extensive now. So they would be able to, paint a clearer picture for you of what the process looks like than I.
I see.
And then we could have a standalone meeting subsequent to that presentation.
Okay.
Okay, I'm game for all of the above and am really supportive of a Thursday, Friday meeting wherever we can get it.
We're straw polling. Sorry.
Straw
So, sorry, gang, I'm just trying to catch up with all of
poll. We
this.
can come back to you if you like.
That would be
Yeah.
great. I'm trying to figure out my teaching schedule.
I don't have a lot of qualms with the proposed shift to the March, June, September, December, except for June, because June tends to be a little bit heavier month with activities that are going on. And the ability to shift time away from from the hospital, it gets a little bit difficult sometimes.
Yeah, I'm in agreement with the proposal of, doing it up north Thursday, Friday, if that is an option. It doesn't really matter to me. The strategic meeting, getting them to present so we can see the scope of what it would be probably be a really good idea, because it generally needs to be a standalone, just for the focus. So, yeah, either way, my schedule will allow it. Thanks.
I would like to see the strategic planning meeting as a standalone also. I have no problems though with the Thursday, Friday meeting. I don't want to see the June meeting change to July, because that's an extremely busy month for me. But if it does have to change, I can make whatever arrangements necessary.
And I'm okay with the proposed calendar. I'm okay with the Thursday, Fridays in Sacramento. And I like the idea of getting a little more information about strategic planning. I think our experience last time was that maybe they needed more time with this.
I believe so.
Depending on what their process is like now, I think that'd be good.
Any thoughts on the strategic plan being a standalone or attached to a meeting?
I think it just depends on the time requirement. No, I think either way.
Okay.
How you feeling, Jesus? Are you able to respond, or you still need some more consideration? Okay.
So, quickly looking through all this, I think I would be in favor of everything that's been proposed. My challenge is going to be in September. So, because shifting a little farther into the year sort of puts me a little deeper into the teaching. The December board meeting, I don't think would be a problem, as it's right around finals week, so our teaching load would be significantly decreased. It's September, the Wednesday, Thursday. I would, just in that month, Thursday, Friday would be a lot easier for me, but I may be able to switch class times and slots with enough leeway.
So then, for consideration, for the March and the September meetings, would it help any of the members if we shifted them either a week prior or a week later, also switching them to Thursday, Friday?
September would present a conflict because it would be hitting the CPTA conference, and Friday is the business meeting for the association.
But if you were to switch it from 12-13 to 13-14, does that create a concern?
No. If you're just shifting to Thursday, Friday,
Right.
that would be okay. Shifting to 2021
I
would
see.
be a problem. Because we would also, with the shift to 2021, we would not have representatives from the association present on the 21st.
And for the month of March, while we have conclave on the 17th, if we move the meeting to either the 8th, 9th, or 22nd, or 23rd, would that create a difficulty for anyone?
No, that would not be an issue for me.
With the Thursday, Friday, I mean, because that's what I'm trying to see how it fits into the calendar. I think it sounds like when we're in Sacramento, we want to try the Thursday, Friday.
Right.
Okay. I would like to be able to report conclave to the board.
That would be nice.
So 22nd, 23rd would make that possible.
That works for me actually better.
I just have one question, and it's kind of for Tara and Jason. As we get out further with that March meeting,
Mhm.
is the potential that, is it a decision that in 100 days goes into effect? So there's just a potential of a teleconference meeting?
Absolutely. That's the cautionary tale, is that during the transition where we'll be stretching from the November meeting to the latter March meeting now, there is a potential there that we might have to call a teleconference. And then having said that, we've never had that situation before, but
I'm saying that's the solution, though. I mean, there is
yeah,
a solution to
that's the
that.
solution.
And is there any requirement for us to have our strategic planning session by a certain date?
Not a line in the sand, if you will, but our previous plan is expired, so
I
this
see.
is the year that we should be developing the new one. And we're doing it in the early part of the year at that point, so
Right, okay.
we're on schedule.
If we were to bring Solid into the November board meeting and then maybe have the standalone meeting in the first couple of months, would
Sure.
that kind of take away the need for a teleconference?
I'll have to find out Solid's availability to come to Ohlone, but I don't think that's a problem. I think they can still do that.
Then if we did the strategic planning session in February, if there was any discipline that needed to be discussed within that
You'd have
100
a,
days, we could
you'd have
handle
a
it then.
backup plan at that point.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So, I heard that Alicia and Daniel do have issue with the June meeting. Now, is that like really firm, or is it just a preference that you'd rather do July?
At this point, it's all preference.
Okay,
It just makes my life easier, but I can make it work.
okay.
Is there any benefit to either of the members switching it to the 13th, 14th?
It would be worse for me.
Okay,
No difference for me.
okay.
So just to summarize, we have on the table at the moment March 22nd and 23rd, correct?
Mhm.
June 20th and 21st,
Correct,
September 13th and 14th,
correct.
and December 5th and 6th, with the potential of Solid presenting at the November meeting and having a strategic planning session in February, or Solid presenting at the March meeting and we have a strategic planning session subsequently.
That's correct.
So, with that said, is there any further board discussion on the topic?
Taking into account the potential for having to deal with discipline, it makes sense to me to try to get strategic plan put into February.
Absolutely.
And then that's a backup
Backup plan.
for us, but it's the opportunity to be able to do it. It's not necessarily even backup, because right now it's an if,
Mhm.
but to be able to have that as the option if it's necessary, I think makes sense.
And we'll be reaching out to Solid to see if we can arrange that.
Okay, any further discussion, concerns, questions? Okay, what do you need from us, Jason? Do you need us to vote on this? Do you need us just to,
A motion to adopt the calendar as amended.
as amended, with the strategic planning still sort of being okay. Do we have a motion to adopt the 2018 calendar as amended?
So moved.
Second? Well, hold on. Any further board discussion? Any public comment? All those in favor, can we get a roll call vote?
Katerina Ellaby,
Aye.
Alicia Benaimi.
Yes.
Deborah Alviso,
Yes.
Jesus Dominguez,
Yes.
Daniel Drummer,
Yes?
Tanya McMillian,
Aye.
TJ Watkins.
Yes?
Thank you.
And that vote was unanimous. Thank you. All right, so Jason, would you mind having staff sort of clean this up and distribute the
Absolutely.
cleaner version before we
Absolutely.
leave today? Thank you. All right, well, looks like our guest still isn't here, so let's move into language. We're going to pick up where we left off yesterday with the review of the disciplinary guidelines, agenda item number 12B. And I believe we left off on agenda page number 114.
I think we're on page 118
118, okay, thank you.
or page 69, roughly, if you don't have the agenda page numbering.
I have a comment about page 64 of the disciplinary guidelines. That's the internal pagination, or 113 for the agenda item pagination. And it's just a quick one. Under the heading B, practice monitoring required, ing is struck through, and also the space. The space should not be struck through.
Can you repeat that so I just got to the page?
The heading B, practice monitor required, ing is struck through, and the space should not be struck through.
So moving on to page 69, where we left off.
Under heading XX, notice to consumer, line 2, after the date August 2, 2012, it needs a comma after 2012.
And where it says CCR code section, it should not say code.
I would like to make a proposal, or I'm wondering if this is a potential more efficient way to handle some of the editorial, punctuation, grammatical kinds of things. Can those things be done offline? Do they need to be done in meeting?
I'm actually happy that you brought that up. Some of the things that we've been correcting, we determined yesterday, are a result of the conversion between Word and PDF. So a lot of the spacing issues and even some of the spelling errors fall into that category, but absolutely. We'll use that as what we call a style guide requirement and correct it as we do a global search.
Additionally, when you do a motion to adopt these guidelines as amended, the motion itself can include the authority to the executive officer to make any minor changes.
Non-sensitive.
Right.
So then, in the spirit of trying to be a little bit more efficient with our discussion and moving forward with this item, this agenda item, I would like to ask that we try to focus on the content issues more than the, pardon? What was the word? Grammatical
That's fine.
focus that we've gotten a little bit buried in. And for somebody who loves to wordsmith, that's a big step for me.
The first step is admitting you have a problem.
It's not a problem.
So then, moving on, page,
Right above the XX where there's, right above the XX where there's a note, I had a question, because it makes it, when I read it, it sounds as though the only time this will be used is when the respondent has had an impairment. But I thought that this also might be used if there was a documentation issue, because we'd be notifying them about a review of their records. Okay, I wanted to know the background of inserting that note.
Actually, I think that's misplaced.
But it does refer specifically to condition M.
Does it seem like it fits worksite monitor better than it does? Or the description is wrong. Condition M is necessary if condition B is used, but it is more about a disclosure to the patient that a third party will be reviewing your records, not the impairment issue. So to edit that.
Would it be helpful to change the first sentence of that note to instead read, if condition B, practice monitor is used, comma, condition M is necessary to advise patients of supervisor review of their records?
I'm fine with that, just rearranging it. And then we're striking lines 2, 3, and 4 of that note.
Right.
Any other discussion on section M or term M? Okay, we can move forward.
Page 70?
Sorry.
Go ahead.
So there's a new condition for consideration on that page that's labeled XX. And so I think there should be some consideration given to that.
Thanks, that was, since this is an existing requirement, I was wondering if there should be some note to the ALJ, or for our reference, that although this is an existing requirement, we're almost asking that they use that option of the
Right, so
notification.
that's the point of value that I saw in it, is currently in regulation, licensees have a choice to either conspicuously display this on a wall somewhere in their practice where where consumers can see it, or in the case that they cannot do that, provide it to them and then record their receipt of that notice in the medical record. And so this is actually taking away, further restricting and saying, no, you're going to give this to them and have them record the receipt of it each time. So you want something that's similar to, in addition to the existing requirement as a result of the regulation? To at least focus them on that it is a requirement currently, but there are options.
Could this just be an option under that initial term that discusses notification to patients? Is that,
This is almost a lesser, so I don't see notification to patient and notice to consumer being used together.
oh, I see, it's noted to do two different
Yeah,
populations.
it's
Okay.
almost where maybe notification to patient isn't quite appropriate, given the circumstances, but you still want that proactive delivery where you could encourage the consumer to have that access. And so
Okay,
we don't want a shade of gray in there where it's a sign on a wall that they may not miss, or they may miss. You want a more proactive delivery of that information.
Maybe it should be something like, kind of like, although a notice to consumer is already an existing requirement for all licensees, in this case, this term of probation would require the acknowledgement part,
Sure, we can include that language.
something like that.
The only other point that I'd make too is that, to Kat's comment, is that with a probation monitor or a supervising physical therapist, as their performance with, the practice monitor or a supervising physical therapist, with their performance in that role and in the agreement with our probation monitor, this is something that would be checked anyway. So we would be making sure that if it's not conspicuously displayed, the supervising PT or the practice monitor would be providing that as an issue of compliance in the order. Did they, in fact, deliver it to each patient and have them sign it? But I see the value in adding the comment, so both respondent, ALJ, or stakeholder, consumers have the understanding that while it is a requirement, this is just eliminating the conspicuously displayed portion of it.
I've got an idea on how to structure this one quickly. The sentence could begin, although all licensees are required, comma, pursuant to, then strike in accordance with, and then begin with California Code of Regulations. Title 16, Section 1398.15, comma, respondent shall insert also provide form NTC 12-01. So the new sentence would read, although all licensees are required, comma, pursuant to California Code of Regulations, Title 16, Section 1398.15, comma, respondent shall also provide form NTC 12-01. And then continue with the rest of the sentence.
I think that cleared it up for me. Yeah. Anybody feeling passionately about the rephrased language? No?
It's good.
All right, did you get that, Elsa? Would you like it reread?
To save time, I'll give it to Tara later on.
Okay.
Page 70.
So we have another new term here, term X, our new condition. Could you provide a little background on this?
Yeah,
please?
it's new in the guidelines, but it's something commonly used. It's very similar to notification to employees, but in a situation where our licensee or our respondent in the matter is a employee of a practice but supervises assistive personnel, they would be required to notify any assistive personnel under their supervision of their order.
And by assistive personnel, are you referring to like aides or?
Assistants or aides.
Assistants or aides, okay.
I wonder if it might be helpful to have this ordered near the supervision things. This seems like it's in the notice place, but it makes me wonder if you were looking at terms and you were deciding to allow supervision or not allow supervision, you would also see the notice to that.
So I could move it up before J.
And you know what, I think you got, I mean, I don't need to see where, it's just an idea. I think, I don't even need any decision made, it was just an idea.
And I would suggest striking in the bracket, physical therapy student, interns, foreign educated physical therapists, licensed applicants. Everything except physical therapist assistants or physical therapy aides. Because the others are not assisted personnel.
But they could be under their supervision.
Right. But the title of the section is assistive personnel. So to have that focus be maintained, I think it would get, and I appreciate if they're going to be supervising students or interns or foreign licensed applicants, et cetera, that that should be in a different place and not be included into this section of assistive personnel.
Or the heading should be retitled.
To just notification of probation status?
Yeah. To.
Maybe,
Sorry, I'm just trying to digest it a little bit. I've never experienced a case where we put a respondent on probation and allowed him to supervise PTLA or foreign or students for that matter. So there's already a condition that protects for that, and I'm looking at those shades in between, if I could imagine a situation. So I don't have an issue with striking it from that condition. And it is one of those things that if I found it necessary for whatever certain circumstances, I may still negotiate it as part of a stipulation, but, clearly mapped out in that person's particular order. So I don't have an issue with removing it.
I mean, and I don't recall any time when we've allowed a respondent to supervise any of the categories.
Right.
But because we're working on shades of gray now with potentials of being able to do some limited supervision of some things, I absolutely agree that notification should be done to those individuals that the physical therapist is supervising in whatever case it is, but I don't think it belongs under this particular category with the title.
But with removing those that aren't defined as assistant personnel, that would suffice?
Yes.
Yeah.
And if there's a desire to recreate this in another area for all of those other supervisory type experiences, then I would be fine with that. I think it would be appropriate.
I just wanted to make a note that standard condition number 13 already prohibits supervision of applicants and interns. So arguably notification to them under this term is unnecessary because they can't supervise anyway. My point is in support of removing all individuals in this bracketed section before physical therapist assistive personnel or assistants.
Are we comfortable with that? Yeah. Okay.
71, 72, 73. There's a new condition for consideration. Relinquish wallet license and wall certificate.
Seems pretty self-explanatory. Now, is this something that you would do anyway, and now it's just a term that you're making it more
It's an
formal?
expectation, but to make it clear and notify it in advance, a little bit more transparent, we've included it here.
74. 75.
I have a question on T, the optional language, where it says the condition may be waived by the board upon a written finding by the CDE that the respondent is not a substance abusing licensee. Would that be something done outside, by an outside? Because I thought they have to enroll to have the evaluation.
Correct.
I'd also like to make a note that this provision is actually currently under condition U, which you can see on page 76. We're reorganizing.
But to Dr. Alvisa's point, by operation of the rehabilitation program, they enter into Maximus, obtain their clinical diagnostic evaluation, and then based on the findings of that evaluation, it's determined whether or not they're a candidate for the program. And so if that program determines that they are not a substance abusing licensee and this optional language was used, you would not have to apply the 1441 standards to that person.
But the first paragraph of T already has in there that until the program determines the respondent's participation is no longer necessary. So isn't that already what the optional language says?
So I think and I see the confusion, but I think the difference between the two, and while it's not clear in the language itself, I guess the intent or the purpose is, without the optional language, by operation of the process, while they're determined to not be a candidate of the program and they're released, they would still have to adhere to things like bodily fluid testing and a worksite monitor. This optional language would eliminate those two as a result of a CDE that says they are not a substance abusing licensee. And we don't use it very often.
But those are separate terms.
They are. But they're within these conditions, within the greater conditions applying for the uniform standards.
But if the individual is required within 15 days of the order, of the decision and order,
Mm-hmm.
to enroll in the program, how can the condition be waived if they've not enrolled in the program and had their examination done yet? Because the CDE is done as part of the program.
Yeah.
So if they have to enroll in the program to have the evaluation done, I'm with Dr. Alviso. I'm not clear as to how it can be waived if they haven't had the evaluation, when the evaluation happens at Maximus.
I think the part that's missing from the understanding and the language and the way it's written is it's not just condition T itself that this references, but all of the conditions that apply under the uniform standards. So where we say the substance abuse rehabilitation program, we're also including abstention, BFTs, biological testing, abstention from drugs, any major the codes that or the conditions that follow subsequent to this as part of the uniform standards. I don't think it's clear, but by operation, that's what's used.
But each of those already have the optional language underneath them.
Mm-hmm.
So it just doesn't seem like it belongs up in this one.
Agreed. Unless it's somehow changed to then encompass
All of it.
every piece, every single condition afterwards.
And I think that's intent. I know that's not clear, but
Yeah.
But there could be conditions or circumstances when you wouldn't want it to be that kind of a blanket change.
absolutely. So we're even subsequent to the CDE, I'm still going to insist that there are bodily fluid testing and that there is abstention, and even possibly a worksite monitor to observe sobriety.
I have a question on operation of the program with the CDE evaluation. My understanding is that the CDE occurs first. And that person, the individual, the licensed person, practitioner who performs the evaluation, are they part of the program?
So it doesn't occur first. The enrollment into the program occurs first. Maximus facilitates the choice and the use of who the clinical diagnostic evaluator is.
So the program determines who the CDE.
Correct.
Okay. Yeah, my question was because the program you have to enroll in 15 days, but you have up to 30 to get the evaluation done. Okay.
And that was part of the rationale in switching T and U, because sequentially as they're written today, they're a little out of order, and it creates a point of confusion for respondent. And based on feedback from Monty Martin, the board's probation monitor, we wanted to resequence it to paint a clearer picture to the respondent of what the expectation is.
I'm in favor of removing the optional language from T where it is here and ensuring that it is under all of the other conditions that it applies to.
I agree. I think it's misplaced in this term.
I like that it's placed in those other, underneath those other conditions. We just need to make sure they're everywhere they need to be.
How you feeling, Tanya? You good? Okay. All right, looks like the board is comfortable with that, so we'll strike it from letter T, the optional language.
Just another point on that page before we leave it, though. You'll see above T is another XX, which is an additional, a new condition, if you will. It's not really a new condition, but it's something that we put in to make clarity for the respondent of that expectation again. As part of their enrollment into Maximus, they'll be required to cease practice for 30 days to do a couple of different things. One is to obviously have a couple clean tests to demonstrate sobriety, but also to arrange for a supervising physical therapist and a worksite monitor and those kind of things. The confusion comes where the order isn't very clearly written upon agreement, and sometimes it's a little bit of a surprise that they're not allowed to work for that 30 days. So to be as transparent as possible, we wanted to put that as the first point of sequence
Right.
in this order, so they understand you're going to have a period of cease practice.
Do you think there's any, I know there could be a, oh, sorry, I can't keep track of the green button, I can't see it. Do you think there's any use in linking what that, how the board's gonna determine that? I know there could be a million ways, but, most of this would be based on the evaluation or meeting a certain requirement.
And we do what we can as part of negotiation and information that's transferring from Respondents Council and the AG to inform them of what the program is going to entail, giving them a Maximus handout and that kind of thing to give, so they understand. In deliberation of the order, though, other than their compliance with the order and the CDE, there really isn't. I mean, we're not suspending them, if you will, to be punitive. We're putting a cease practice in place so they can come into compliance with the rest of the conditions in the order before they return to practice. And that could be, well, mostly, according to Maximus and the monitor, it really does usually come down to the sobriety issue and the compliance of BFTs and showing that they've been clean for a period of 30 days before they enter into practice. But sometimes, on rare occasions, it might be that they have yet to attain a supervising physical therapist or a worksite monitor or something like that. So it's very hard to capture that clarity here, but we do what we can to try and make the respondent as informed as possible.
That's fine.
Page 75?
Before we continue, our guest is here, so we're going to table this item for the afternoon, most likely, because after our guest, we're going to move into closed session. Thank you, Elsa. All right, well, let's continue to agenda item number 16. Discussion and possible board action for the increase in board level and exempt status of the executive officer. Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning, members of the board. I'm Ricardo de la Cruz. I'm currently the HR chief for the Department of Consumer Affairs. about to slide out of the chair. And I'm here to assist and answer any questions with regards to agenda item 16.
I'll just fill in there for a second. So before the board is a very familiar packet. We've been through this process last August. We received a denial to our request, and so we have prepared a new request with updated information and additional criteria for the board's consideration, and asked Mr. De La Cruz to come in and assist and answer any questions that might have resulted from the previous request or in the request you have in front of you.
Great, so I'll just go down the line to see if anybody has any questions for Mr. De La Cruz.
Good morning. Have you received the report that is in our agenda?
Yes, I have.
Okay. And do you have any opening comments about the report? Either content, thoroughness, need for additional information?
In the 2 years that I have been with the department, I have reviewed several requests from not just this board, but from all our other 39 boards and bureaus for changes. I will say that this particular request is very thorough. It does a good job of chronicling how the changes since the last evaluation. I believe that this new request captures the growth that the board has experienced. I believe one of the things that needed a little bit more clarification, which I believe is now captured in here in this new request, is that how the board has grown underneath the executive officer, and how the need is now more dire for a assistant executive officer to exist underneath, and how through the growth of its original structure, how there was originally a concept for an assistant executive officer, but with budgeted positions and with the need of oversight for particular areas and particular units, that that those duties essentially were eroded and were shared among, I believe, 3 different managers, and essentially the title and the responsibilities of a sole assistant executive officer no longer exist.
And the last time that this position was evaluated for revision was in 2000, is that correct?
I believe it was older than that. No, it was, I'm sorry, it was August 31st of 2000.
So 17 years without any review or adjustment by HR or any higher level of authority who would be monitoring the status of the EO, the workload of the EO, the size of the population that the board oversees, to be able to make any adjustments?
Correct.
Is there an explanation for that?
It's ultimately a board decision to evaluate the effectiveness of its board, of its size, of its structure, if there's a need for change. And we, in the Office of Human Resources with the Department of Consumer Affairs, help facilitate that request. We will help in gathering information for the board, provide as much clarification in the process, and help to answer any questions that the administration may have when evaluating these requests.
I have a little bit of frustration with that because this board has now discussed this topic at more meetings than it hasn't in my tenure on the board. And I've been on the board for less than 3 years. We've discussed this as an item on our agenda more times than it hasn't. And in my mind, it's taken up far too much of this board's time to try to pursue an adjustment that should have been done long ago, just in reviewing the material that we have.
I'll add my frustration as well. You know, in the first draft, maybe we didn't highlight as well the need for an AEO, but as a board, we look at what's presented before us, we make an informed decision, we're under the impression that it is a board decision. So we make our proposal and it gets denied. And I'm finding that we have to really build up ammunition, really make this lengthy case. And I'm frustrated because I don't feel like that should be necessary. I feel like we are the appointed board. We should be able to make this decision. We've made this decision, and we get a flat no without any explanation. So that's my frustration.
I need to to disagree a bit with Dr. Rubino Amen that I don't believe this level of discussion should be a board decision. I think that the board should be evaluating the performance on an annual basis of the EO and making recommendations about performance adjustments. The board should not be required to make the decisions and the arguments about modifying the classification level of the individual who is clearly misclassified. There are no other EOs in the department who are being paid at level O, who are assigned to level O, who have the number of employees under him, the number of staff under him, the number of managers who are under him, the size of the licensed population. That doesn't exist for any other EO in the system. And it's inappropriate. We should not be having to deal with this. This should be something that should be handled by administration.
I have a question. The quantifiable measures that is laid out, we've already met those quantifiable measures. We are running into a structural dilemma where we need the actual exemption level status to be increased. That is what we need in order for the board to perform and effectively and efficiently. And we as the board, we have done our due diligence. We have looked at all these performance indicators, and we, in our determination of evaluating the executive officer, we have determined, yes, we affirm that this is an exempt level status, and we want to support him in performing his role even better. Because from our perspective, he has done an outstanding job. And we have many people that have referenced that has been willing to put that on paper, that he has done so. So are we missing something? That's my question. Are we missing something? Is there someone somewhere that knows exactly what is going on and that can give us a very definitive answer that this is why we are saying no? Because I just want to know why. How did they come to their no? If we, reasonably intelligent people that have made reasonable, taken information and said we've come to a reasonable understanding that we feel this way. And now I want to understand, is there a place that we've missed something? That's my only question. Why? How did they come to know?
So I did want to provide one bit of clarification in that, and that is that when boards evaluate the structure and make a recommendation for an exempt level increase, it is ultimately not, it should not be with the intent of impacting the incumbent. It's more about the size and the structure. The administration reviews those as two separate and independent, and while Executive Officer Kaiser has done tremendous efforts with this board and with his staff and been exemplary in his duties, that it's independent of, that recommendation is independent of his annual performance evaluation. And therefore, this request by the board should be based on the need for growth either underneath or as a result of the growth that has already occurred. I believe that this revision to this original request, and that's how I consider this, is that this is an opportunity for us to build upon our original request and to provide clarification, provide more of, be able to articulate in a more clear manner that this board has grown not only underneath, but in terms of positions underneath Executive Officer Kaiser, but also the licensee population, how it's grown and how it is in comparison to other boards of similar exempt level.
So,
I don't mean to speak out of turn, but this particular, Mr. De La Cruz's point is poignant and important to me. I think the presentation in this package, its intent was to keep those two items separate from each other, my performance versus the structure of this board. This request, and it's awkward to discuss it because it seems self-serving from my standpoint, but for me is more about the structure of the board itself, how it affects my staff, my senior staff, and my management. And so I want to echo his comments and also add to them and ask, is there anything in the request that we've presented that creates a confusion on that point? Because I think that's the voice that we wrote this report in from the beginning, is that we tried to keep them very separate.
Any references in prior requests or in prior that seems to not be there, be clarified that what the intent is of the board, and what we try to do, at least with in reviewing of these documents, is to make sure that the administration will review it from the lens of this position and ultimately how do we accomplish the goals of the intention of the board.
So I have a future lens that I want to look through, because we were under the impression, so those are the separation, the performance versus the structure, right? So the packet that we got essentially contains some of the same quantifiable measurements that we have presented again now, that actually clarifies the shifts that has happened in the board. And so I think that the essential components have been there previously, and it is there now. So now with a few more additions to that, I'm asking, what can we do with a future lens that we don't have this meeting a year from now again? And then, now, what can we do now? Clarify now, so that we don't have to have this meeting a year from now where we hear essentially that we needed a little bit more information. Because now we have a little bit more information than we had previously. A little bit more of a study, a little bit more of a quantification, a little bit more of a clarity. I just want to, my goal is to resolve this. Because we can have continuous conversations about it that can drag on and drag on, but because this is where I'm going to mix things up a little bit. Because we're talking about a person leading a group of people, a team of people, I am concerned that we are, so on the structural thing, and then the person that is leading that structure, I'm looking at motivational levels, I'm looking at their own personal growth, and at a point in this, we are going to run into a motivation problem about just not being treated in the kind of way that every one of us want to be treated, in kind of an equal and acknowledged for the kind of work that we perform. And we as a board, we look at those factors too. Maybe that's not a quantifiable measure, but I want that to be taken into account, because the no, for whatever reason, ultimately impacts the individual. So again, I just want to get to a solution. What are the tangible steps that we can go over and above than what is even in our packet today?
I believe that the board has done an excellent job of highlighting where this executive officer sits in relation to other boards, in how it where the differences are, and where the similarities are in other exempt levels. Ultimately, the goal of this board and how it's been articulated in this new request is that the current structure is hindering the ability of the board to have a significant structure underneath to ensure that that there's continuity in management should Mr. Kaiser not be available, should be out of the office or handling a different assignment. This also will allow for future growth. An exempt level increase does ensure that the board can either appropriately grow or that it is successful in budget change proposals, which would result in new classifications to the board. And to answer your question, it is my intention that when I do address the board and that when I do assist both the board chair and vice chair, that it is our intention to try to put forward the most complete and thorough document that captures the intention of the board and is as successful for the board.
So, I completely understand what your intention was, but clearly this issue is important to us, and that's why we are being relentless in pursuing what needs to happen here. Jason, our executive officer, his performance has been outstanding. We did our due diligence in making sure that when we say that it is a fact and it's honest. His staff needs to be commended. Since 2000, this position hasn't been reassessed. And like Dr. Drummer said, clearly his position definitely is misclassified. There needs to be a change. From 2010 to 2016, this department, that EO, has absorbed more work and no change in resources. I look at that word absorbed, and it makes me think of a sponge. And a sponge can only absorb so much liquid before it starts dripping out. So with him being where he is now, this level, you expect them to absorb even more work, because we know that things are going to change and they should change for the better. But to deny this change, which clearly should have happened many years ago, in my opinion, looking at the record, I think that's unfair. And I personally feel like a robotic no to this request, because that's how it appears to me, from my perspective, is unfair. It's unfair to this EO. It's unfair to this department. And I take it as a slap in the face of this board, because we did our due diligence. This is not a frivolous request. This is something that should have happened many years ago. So I'm trying to figure out, how do you justify that?
I'm not in a position to be able to say how the administration justified approving or denying any of the requests. Just that the Department of Consumer Affairs, my staff, and all representatives of the department work as liaisons for the board, work to help to facilitate your requests. When there are requests for additional information or for clarifying information, we definitely pass that along to the board chair or their designee, so that we can provide as much clarification as possible to try to accomplish the intention of the board.
That response tells me that you are in the position to justify what the administration basically uses as their template to come up with decisions. Otherwise, you wouldn't be sitting here today, correct?
Not necessarily. Only
Explain, please.
is that our position with the Department of Consumer Affairs is to help and assist the boards. We do communicate with the administration, we do facilitate. Once we receive this request, that's voted on by the board, much like in the previous request, we facilitate the submission of that package, which also includes additional documentation, additional clarifying information to the administration for review.
Where does that additional clarification and
We do
documentation?
provide budget, provide budget material, organizational structure, duty statements for, not only for the executive officer, but also the positions underneath. If there's any proposed duty statements for proposed positions that may be impacted or changed by it, we will include those as well.
Did you include those this time?
I haven't received this request formally from the board. Once it's adopted today by the board, then we will submit that information.
I'll have further questions in a minute. Let me absorb that.
I have a question. What is the year or the version of the guidelines that are being currently used now for the exempt level? Is there like a year of the study associated with those?
The last study that I'm aware of that occurred was published in January 2012, or 2011, I'm sorry.
2011. And the 2000 guidelines, when in 2011 and 2012, this board looked at that, we, at that time, it looked as though we aligned with the level M back then. That was 11-12 based on the 2000. And so for at least 6 years, maybe even longer than that, we've been sitting and functioning at a M level without that structure. And so I think there's something in that history of the study that was done back in 11 and 12 for us, that we did kind of investigating this, we just couldn't go any further at that time, that we've actually been functioning at this level for a long time. Getting along probably based more on the quality of the people, and without that, this had the potential to fail. And so there's definitely a history that we've continued to function at that level. It's been necessary, it's been needed for that long. I don't mean that in the sense that we function and we don't need anything else. It's that we've actually been a board at that level for an awful long time. And so if there's not something in our history, in our proposal, then I would suggest that we add that, because I think there's something to that. Previous studies would, even at that time, would put us at level M.
Do you have any further comments from the board?
So upon receiving our new request and reviewing it, I would like to suggest that if there's anything that, you discover in our new request that says, well, this could potentially help a favorable outcome, that you inform us and we can make the necessary amendments or adjustments or added before we proceed beyond where it leaves your desk.
And that's essentially what I have done from the moment that the documents were made public. I reviewed this packet starting at page 156 and going forward to review the request in its completeness to see if there was something that could either be emphasized or something that should be changed or altered. And so with the intent that if there is something that needs to be changed or something that can be amended, that it's communicated to the board.
Yeah, and to expressly communicate right now, like Dr. Alviso described, that there is a history that has preceded all of this. And the board has succeeded in spite of its limitations. And that can only be accredited to the leadership that the executive officer has demonstrated and been giving in the staff. They have been creative, they have, overcome hurdles. So I just want that to be known and acknowledged as well as part of this. This is just a conversation about it, so thank you.
Oh, one more question. So based on what Board Member Watkins just asked you, there's nothing that we can add or amend or change to the packet that was presented to you? Nothing?
Any clarifying points, I have communicated that to Vice President Alicia and have been taken under advisement.
Thank you.
I think maybe just asking, since you were the one who let us know that the request was denied, was there any other information that they gave you, or how was that information given to you? Just request denied, or was there anything in there that could give us any more information of why it was?
Unfortunately, the administration did not provide further clarification or a recommendation or a request for additional documents. However, the administration is always agreeable to re-reviewing the request, provided additional clarification. I have yet to experience a board that has given up on their request. So I definitely do not recommend simply giving up on the request.
Thank you.
So what I feel this really boils down to is a public protection issue. Our mandate as a board is to ensure the public is protected from individuals who might be a threat to them. And so as a public member of this board, it's very concerning to me that we're not provided with the proper resources to do our job. And I know that you don't have the authority to grant us what we're asking for, Ricardo, which I'm sure puts you in a very frustrating position at times to be the middleman. And so I would like to thank you for what you have done so far, and hopefully the assistance that you'll provide us in the future. But please keep in mind that this is not a wish list request. This is, as you put it, dire in your opening statements. This is not something that can wait any further. And so with your assistance, we hope to be successful in the future. And I think the board has expressed their concerns and frustrations with doing everything we've been told and still not receiving what we feel we've earned, not deserve, that we've earned. So if there's no further board comment or any public comment, then you're dismissed. Thank you.
Thank you.
Madam President, I believe that this, in my mind, rises to the level of action, and that we actually, Mr. De La Cruz, if you could return for a moment, please. And I believe that this requires some board action, and with that thought, I would offer a motion to demand that Mr. De La Cruz take this, review the packet, take the packet to, and submit it to administration for review, so that this can be processed.
I'll second that.
Legal counsel, are there any issues with that motion?
No, the memo itself requested the board. I'm turning to the right page here.
Page 160.
Mhm. The motion in the materials is to vote in support of the DCA, Office of Human Resources, to work with the staff and appropriate agencies to obtain an exempt level increase. Based upon the expression of the board's frustration today, seems that a motion to demand further action on the part of Mr. De La Cruz and the Office of Human Resources is what the board is requesting. I would only include that the Office of Human Resources and presumably Mr. De La Cruz work with the staff as well as other appropriate agencies to obtain the exempt level increase for the EO position.
Thank you, council.
So we have a motion and a second. Did you need him to reread that motion so it's more clear? No? Okay. Any additional discussion?
Kind of semantics, and I don't know whether it's appropriate or not, but to me, and looking at all the information, preparing these packages, we have, in a sense, made a decision that we believe this board is at that level. So, in effect, what we're asking is with help administrating that, like making that occur, not requesting it. We actually think it's due, and we're asking for that to be put in place.
So, with that additional clarity, so the original motion as amended or clarified, we had a motion by Dr. Drummer and a second by, was it Dr. Dominguez?
No, Mr. Watkins.
Mr. Watkins. Any additional discussion from the members?
I actually believe we need stronger language than ask.
I
This
think,
is-
I think we're seeking implementation of it.
And this has gone beyond requesting or asking or any other level below demanding that this be done, in my mind. And if somebody has disagreement with that should be brought back to this board in answer of that demand.
Okay, any public comment regarding this issue? Mr. De La Cruz, would you like to respond to any of that?
Only that I look forward to working with the board and to help facilitate whatever request the board has or whatever vote that the board has.
Okay, thank you. So all those in favor, we're going to do a vote.
Can we have the motion read?
Can we have the motion read?
There's been words added.
Yeah.
Okay, so the motion is to demand further action of Ricardo De La Cruz and OHR in obtaining an EO exempt level increase for PTBC's EO position and work with staff and appropriate agencies to increase the PTBC EO position.
Are we okay with that?
No. You want to add further clarity?
I do recommend that the board specify in the motion what level you are requesting,
Thank you.
Thank you.
or that you're voting on, sorry.
So in that language, Brooke, can we include exempt level L, or however it's named? If that's what everyone agrees with. So, Tara or Deborah, do you have any thoughts on strong language for that motion?
Can you read it again, Brooke?
Demand further action of Ricardo De La Cruz and OHR in obtaining an exempt level increase to level L for the PTBC EO position and work with staff and appropriate agencies to increase the PTBC EO position.
I think the language should read from level O to level L. I don't think that was very clear.
Thank you, Sawa.
So I heard a request by Dr. Drummond that if there are any problems with the demand by the board to increase the EO position for OHR, to return to the board to explain deficiencies in the board's request. Did you want to add that to the motion?
Yes.
We can definitely.
Can you repeat that language, Tara, please?
So at the end of the first sentence, add, and to also demand that the Office of Human Resources return to the board to explain any deficiencies in the board's demand for an increased level of the EO position from level O to L. And Brooke, when you're done, would you read the whole thing again?
I'm still working on it.
Okay.
Apologies.
Can I ask, do we have an existing vote in the past, or do we need another one from the board voting on our decision that the EO position should be moved to a level L?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear the question.
Do we have an existing vote, or do we need to vote as a board in agreement that the EO level should be at level L?
I think you do have, from the last attempt,
Okay.
a vote that put it at that level. That's been, that package has finality and it has been denied. And in this new attempt, with this language in the motion that you have currently, I think it's covered.
Okay.
I mean, the board would be voting at that point to move from O to L, and it's actually stated twice within the motion.
Good. Okay. I ask that because I just want it to be clear that this is what the board's decided. This is what the board has decided, and now we're asking for it to true up. So, yeah.
So perhaps at the very beginning of this motion, we need to add that the motion is to adopt this document in item 6. Oh, sorry, 16. And present as necessary to seek the exempt level increase from O to L. And then continue with the demand. Can you read that back?
The motion is to adopt this document in item 16 and present as necessary to seek the exempt level increase from O to L. The board demands OHR return to the board any deficiencies and the board's demand of the increased level from O to L. Needs to be cleaned up on the bottom.
There's a sentence in between there that is, I think you had it before, it was to demand further action of De La Cruz and OHR.
In obtaining an exempt level increase from O to L. And then we went on to say, OHR work with staff and appropriate agencies to increase PTB's EO position.
Yes.
So you want that in between?
Right. And then the demand to return to the board to explain any deficiencies in its request would be the final sentence or final term of the motion.
Could I just ask that we're already assuming that the answer is going to be no, and we're already asking for them to come back? Should it be necessary, then we are essentially requiring them to give us the answer. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So, can you repeat the end part? So, demand to return. So, I think,
And OHR return to the board any deficiencies of the increased level from O to L.
okay, so let's restructure that so that it should read instead, and should the boards, is this an application? I'm trying to figure out exactly what is the document that's submitted. Is it an application to
No,
increase?
It's essentially, it's documents in support of a board vote. So,
But what is the package called that's submitted?
an exempt position request.
I
And
don't want to call it a request.
And
I-
unfortunately, that's the package
Right.
title for
But
it.
can we say if the board's vote is not supported by,
if the board's vote is not approved,
I want to kind of clear away, stay clear of requesting anything.
I guess really it's if the board's demand to increase the exempt level position from O to L is not approved. Who would approve it?
It would be the administration.
If it's not approved by the administration for OHR to return to the board to explain any deficiencies in the board's demand. Can you read that whole thing back? Thank you.
Okay, so let me try to piece it together. The motion is to adopt this document in item 16 and present as necessary to seek the exempt level increase from O to L. And for OHR to work with staff and appropriate agencies to increase PTB's EO position level. And to demand OHR return to the, and if the board's demand, the increased level from O to L, is not approved by the administration, for OHR to return to the board to explain any deficiencies.
I'm still not hearing the initial demand. There was a sentence that should go after your new first sentence and before the rest, that the board demands.
Okay, we could, let me read this and see if it captures what the board is. The motion is to adopt this document in item 16 and present as necessary to seek the exempt level increase from O to L. The board demands further action of Ricardo de la Cruz and OHR in obtaining an exempt level increase from O to L. And for OHR to work with staff and appropriate agencies to increase the PTB CEO position. And if the board's demand in the increase from level O to L is not approved by the administration, for OHR to return to the board to explain any deficiencies.
I think the demand part is missing from the first piece. So after adopt, let's change the wording. The document in item 16, let's change that to the adopt the demand for exempt officer exempt level increase. Did I say executive officer?
You said exempt officer.
The board's demand for executive officer exempt level increase from level O to L, and then continue with the rest. And that at that point it goes adopt and present.
So,
What's that look like?
so the motion is to adopt and present the board's demand for the EO exempt level increase from level O to L. It's the first part. In item 16, and present as necessary.
No, it's adopt the demand for an executive officer exempt level increase. It's difficult because I'm trying to figure out what this document is called. I don't want to call it materials in item 16.
Is it a report?
Yes. Adopt the proposal for the executive officer exempt level increase from level O to L and demand and how does the rest of it continue? And demand it be presented.
Okay, so the motion is to adopt the proposal for the EO exempt level increase from level O to L and demand it be presented as necessary to seek the exempt level increase. And then we go on to say, OHR work with staff and appropriate agencies to increase the PTV CEO position. And if the board's demand to increase the level from O to L is not approved by the administration, for OHR to return to the board to explain any deficiencies.
Madam President, I have a request.
Yeah.
And I realize that we're working on that, and part of what we're trying to do is actually be able to send this forward. In looking at some of the materials, I actually feel like I need just a tiny bit more time, which I can probably do at a break,
Okay.
to make sure that I feel like we have the proper rationale. It's just going to take me about 5 minutes.
Okay. Why don't we recess for about 10 minutes, come back at 10:52, and pick up from where we left off.
Thank you, Ricardo.
Okay, we're back from recess. The time is 10:57 a.m. And we're picking back up on agenda item number 16. And I believe that the EO would like to make a comment about the motion. Or about the proposal.
Before we speak to the motion, I have a suggested amendment to the package materials themselves. A point of clarity to support the board's recommendation of L and to avoid any confusion. On page 163 of the materials, which is attachment 2 of agenda item 16, it is a comparison, if you will, to boards of like size, but clearly shows that this board has a much higher authorized budget, a much larger licensing population, and also more authorized positions than those boards in level M, which supports the request to level L. So the amendment that I propose is the descriptor of Table 1, where it says the boards similar to BTBC's scope of responsibility are highlighted in blue. As a change of language that says, that represents that hierarchy, that this board is above them. And so if the members could consider maybe a different sentence that represents that further supports the request to L, that's something that they should consider. It might be confusing to say we're all similar to M when the chart actually shows that we're far superior. In a sense of statistics, anyway. And it may be realized by simply striking that line.
That's true, too.
Except I think your point is that you exceed those M's in most of those categories, or all of them.
One of the difficulties in putting these packages together is obtaining this information. And if the board would like me to, should I am able to include those that are at level L to show the comparisons between those. I'll make that attempt before its submission,
I think that's important.
and I'll ask Ricardo for that assistance as well.
Okay.
So the descriptor for table one could either be deleted altogether, so that it just has the title, table one, list DCA Healing Arts Boards. Or if the desire is to have some sort of a descriptor that would say the physical therapy, the PTB scope of responsibility surpass any listed as level M.
Either option, I think, works.
Yeah. I'm okay with that amendment. Is the board satisfied with that?
So the amendment also includes, including in this table, examples of level L, is that correct?
If possible.
Okay, because that's going to be a substantive change that the board needs to make sure you want to include. Because the ultimate motion, if the executive officer has to make any other changes to this package, it can only be non-substantive or technical. So I want to be clear that everyone's on board with adding the level O amounts to the table.
Level L.
Sorry, level L amounts to the table if available. Okay.
Is anybody concerned about that amendment?
I think if we put it at level L, and when you look at numbers, there's a favorable direction from which to look at it, and from this angle, from seeing that we sitting at O and everybody that's at M is in a better position, at lack of a better word, than what we are sitting at O. If we say L and L says, oh, it doesn't show such a vast contrast, or it shows it more perfectly, then yes. It depends on what the numbers are telling us. And it creates the impression and impact that we really desire.
Right.
Then I would slant it with L. If it does better with, making my case to slant it from, out of M, then I would do that. So maybe that as part of,
Right.
depending on, I don't know.
What it looks like. Yeah.
What it looks like.
Kind of along that same thinking, when I look at that table, my suggestion would be that it looks as though they're ordered by licensee population, but I might suggest that you group all three of the M's right below PTVC. It just makes the comparison and the ability to look at those a little bit
Okay.
easier.
And Jason, was there a reason why you excluded level L in creation of this chart?
Only that information is very difficult to come by. And so, but while we've requested it in the past, I might be able to obtain it through DCA's HR unit.
So hearing TJ's concerns, I do agree that depending on what data you provide, it tells a different story. Is that an amendment that we're comfortable with now, considering that information? I do agree with Deb's suggestion of reordering it to give it a more clear picture by grouping the M's. But how do the other members feel now that we've discussed the table in further detail?
It might even be a truer picture to show the three M's and then have PTBC bolded and then the rest below that.
Okay.
Now, Everybody says they feel good, but feel good about including L or excluding L?
We just feel good.
Okay. It is a beautiful day outside, yeah.
I feel good about including L.
Okay. So going along with Deb's reordering of the chart, it would start with L at the top, show the M's, and then us up above at the top of the O's, right?
Yeah,
Okay.
that'll look good. It'll look bad. It'll look good.
Depending on how you look at it.
Yeah.
It's a fuller picture, in my opinion, yeah.
Yeah.
So with that, we've changed the motion a little bit to include for the materials amended, the package amended. And so if the board is ready, we can read that amendment back.
Please and thank you.
The motion is to adopt the proposal as amended for the EO exempt level increase from level O to L as presented in agenda item 16 and demand the proposal be presented by OHR as necessary to seek the exempt level increase from O to L. The board has voted to increase the exempt level of the executive officer from level O to L and for OHR to work with PTB staff and appropriate agencies to increase the EO exempt level and authorize the EO to make any technical or non-technical changes to the proposal. Should the board's demand for an EO exempt level increase be denied by the administration, the board demands that OHR return to the board to explain the reasons for the denial, including any specific deficiencies in the proposal.
You want to suggest it? Or whoever makes the
I mean, as long as we get feedback, I don't, do you want to hear it from?
I would agree with that. The notion of asking the administration, that's really the decision level. Otherwise, we're always operating through a third, not that Mr. De La Cruz is a third party, but he is sort of the conduit
Right.
of the decision.
So, should the board's demand for an EO exempt level increase be denied by the administration, the board demands that OHR return to the board to explain the administration's reasons for the denial.
And so the amendment would be, instead of having OHR return to us, it would be the administrative decision maker.
One step further.
We want to hear from the person who said
It's
no,
authority, right?
who had that authority.
I agree.
Minimizes confusion
Yeah.
when you're hearing it from the horse's mouth, so to speak.
Should the board's demand for an EO exempt level increase be denied by the administration, the board demands that the administration that denied the request return to the board to explain the reason for the denial, including any specific deficiencies in the proposal.
Straw poll, are we, we're good?
Yes.
I see nods. Deb, how you feeling down there? Okay. So since we have a completely rewritten motion, Dr. Drummer, did you want to keep your initial motion or make a new one?
No, the revised that was just read is appropriate.
Okay.
The amendments that have been made, yeah.
And we had a second by TJ?
Yeah. Dr. Watkins.
And is there any further board discussion? Any public comment? We're going to do a roll call vote. All those in favor?
Katarina Ellaby,
Aye.
Alicia Benet-Min,
Yes.
Deborah Alviso,
Aye.
Jesus Dominguez,
Aye.
Daniel Drummer,
Aye.
Tanya McMillian,
Aye.
TJ Watkins.
Aye.
Thank you.
That vote was unanimous. And at this time, we're going to move into closed session to deal with some disciplinary cases. We will be back after lunch, which should be around 12:45. 1 o'clock. And we'll pick back up around that time. Thank you. Up with agenda item number 18, Consumer and Professional Associations and Intergovernmental Relations Reports.
We don't have anything to report for FSPPT or CPTA, but I do have a report to read on DCA's behalf. Christine Lawley apologizes for her absence. She wishes she could have been here, and she wanted you guys to know that because you're one of her favorite boards. So, but since the May meeting, and I'm going to read this verbatim, I'd like to update the board on several important leadership changes at the department and agency. On May 19th, Governor Brown announced the appointment of Deborah Hoffman as Undersecretary at the Business Consumer Services and Housing Agency. Ms. Hoffman previously served as the Deputy Press Secretary in the Governor's office since 2015. On July 1st, after 37 years of public service, 17 years at DCA, DCA's Deputy Director of Legal Affairs and General Counsel, Doretha Johnson, retired. Upon Doretha's retirement, Governor Brown appointed Ryan Marcroft to lead DCA's Legal Affairs Division, and Ryan has served as the Assistant Chief of Counsel at DCA since 2016. In mid-July, DCA welcomed Grace Arupo Rodriguez as the Assistant Deputy Director of Legal Affairs at DCA. Grace previously served as Deputy Director of Legal Affairs at the Governor's Office of Business and Economic Development. Finally, DCA Deputy Director of Administrative Services Tanya Corcoran accepted a new position as the Chief Deputy Registrar at the Contractor State Licensing Board. With 28 years of service at DCA, Tanya began her new position at CSLB in July. The recruitment to fill this vacancy is underway. In June, DCA Director Graffilo convened his first directors meeting with board executive officers and presidents, and this meeting included important updates from the department's divisions, as well as an overview of new licensing dashboard QBERT tool. She would like to thank you, the PT board, and me, the executive officer, and Vice President Alicia Rubina Amen for attending and enriching this meeting. And I think she means you, she means Kat. Finally, the department recently released the strategic plan for 2017 to 2020. And similar to the board's strategic plan, the department's executive team developed the new plan with the assistance of DCA's Solid, setting goals for new, more innovative ways to protect both California's consumers and its licensed professionals. The new DCA strategic plan is available on our website at www.dca.ca.gov. Thank you for the board's continued diligence and partnership.
Thank you, Jason. Any comments or questions from the board? Any public comment? All right, before we proceed with agenda item number 20, I would like to take roll call since we've had a member of the board step out for the rest of this meeting.
Katarina Ellaby,
Present.
Alicia Benayemen. Alicia Benayemen is absent. And Deborah Alviso.
Here.
Jesus Dominguez.
Present.
Daniel Drummer.
Here.
Tanya McMillian.
Present.
TJ Watkins.
Present.
All members are present with the exception of Alicia Benayemen, and the board has a quorum.
Thank you, Brooke. Moving forward with agenda item number 20, the Administrative Services Report. We're going to start with letter A, the budget, with Carl Nelson. Good afternoon, Carl.
Just for the record, my name is Carl Nelson, and I am an administrative analyst for the board. And I already presented our year-end 16-17 report. I did want to make just a couple more comments. and make a couple of updates to the board since that report was done. Actually, the first item is just an update on the status of the architectural revolving fund. And I don't know if you noticed, but in expenditures under the facilities line item, we had $200,000 taken out. So we were approved by the Department of Finance, and they encumbered $200,000 for the purpose of any future moves that we may have. The second item that I had, I just really wanted to illustrate how a change in business practices, just a small change, can benefit the budget. And I had noticed that the postage line item was really low this year, and I followed it all year and was wondering what was going on with it. I talked to some of the managers at the board, and they told me that one of the things that they were doing was to send emails as opposed to letters to people that had email addresses. And as a result, I noticed that over the last 3 fiscal years, we had averaged $28,000 per year in postage. And in 16-17, the board expended only $10,000. So just that small business practice change cut an expenditure by 2/3. So I thought it was really just kind of kudos to staff on that one for doing something that was effective and also helped the budget. That's really all I have for the report. If there's any questions.
Hearing none. Thank you, Carl.
Thank you.
Keep up the good work. Okay, now we'll have the outreach report with Liz Constancio. Is she present?
She's not. Liz can't join us today, but I'll be filling in for her. You have
Okay.
a handout distributed to you with the outreach statistics. And so if there's any questions that arise from that handout, I will try to field them as best I can. A highlight to outreach, I think, that is poignant for this board meeting is that we will be attending CPTA's annual conference next month. And so we are in the process of tidying the ship and getting our presentation, up to par, so we show and force and make a good presence. So we have a booth reserved, and we will have a couple different publications ready for them and some flyers informational for both applicants and licensees. So it's the first time in a long time that we've been able to do this. So
Looking at the website activity year-to-date, what do you attribute to the significant decrease in website traffic between last fiscal year and this fiscal year?
I don't actually. I mean, some anomalies we're not going to be able to explain. We have made an effort at trying to improve the data that's on the website, so maybe it's a combination of not having to move around as much within the site itself. But other than that, there's really nothing to explain the decrease itself.
It looks like the consumers page took a significant hit, and I wonder why last year versus this year there's such a huge variance.
That one's pretty easy to explain. So, and that's decreased year after year since the implementation of Breeze. So a lot of the information that consumers would be looking for in verifying their license are steered now to Breeze. So they spend less time, if you will, on our website and more time looking at the documents contained within Breeze.
So we're not tracking the click-through rate if they were to look for Breeze, and now it's on the homepage, they wouldn't even have to go to the consumers tab, is that what?
We certainly could try to track leaving from our website going to Breeze, and I think that's worthwhile. Keeping in mind, there may be some consumers who go to Breeze through DCA or through another board's website, or straight to Breeze if they have something in front of them, like a pamphlet or a flyer. But we could definitely try to filter that information to include exiting PTBC and going to Breeze.
That could also be a licensee, though, checking on their status. And
Oh,
so,
yeah.
it could be anybody.
Yeah, you'd have to keep that in mind, is that that doesn't necessarily mean that it's a consumer going from one to the other. It absolutely could be an applicant with their application, or a licensee with a renewal or duplicate request.
Okay. Any other comments on the handout that Jason provided and staff? Hearing none, is there any public comment? Okay, thank you, Jason. Anything else you'd like to add on that point? Or-
No.
Okay. Well, let's move to agenda item number 21, the application report with Sarah.
Ms. Yura Trent will be
Oh, great.
presenting this report today.
Welcome.
Thank you. Hi,
Hello.
I'm Yura Trent. I'm an analyst with the Applications and Licensing Maintenance Unit. And I will start with the applications report. I'm a little nervous. I reported over the board before. That's okay. You guys have smiling faces. So for the application services program, I'm going to start with the 2016-17 year-end statistics compared to 2015-16 statistics. So for 2015-16, there's been an increase in the applications received by about 21%, which our PTA applications received is contributed about 45% of that. So, I guess generally there's 3% budgeted in for an increase annually. So I know it sounds crazy, I'm sorry. So anyways, we have a 21% increase of applications received, and 45% of that came from PTAs. The other thing that has happened in our section is that applications we received from endorsement applicants, so that's applicants who have licenses in other jurisdictions, that has increased about 35% that we've received. So overall, we've seen a significant increase in applications received. So then when we compare it to the 5-year data, from 2012-13 year to current, there's been about a 46% increase in applicants received, which that includes both PTAs, PTs. So that increased our licensing numbers by 52%. When it comes to the exam passing rate, it's been a steady increase for the national board exams. And for the California law exam, the passing rate has decreased just a little bit, but that could be attributed to the increase in accredited programs. Is there any questions about the applications? Yes, ma'am.
When you mentioned that there have been more applicants for endorsement?
Yes.
Can you just explain the difference in workload for the board, to process those? Or is it different?
I can't really say it's different. I'm not really quite sure of what the difference would be, other than we try to verify their, the licenses in other states that they hold are valid, but the process I think is the same. It's just, I think there's more people applying from other states to California who hold licenses in other states, more like traveling PTs. So that's increased from last year.
This is kind of an opportune time for me to point out, though, that there is kind of a common misconception that an endorsement application should be simpler, especially from the perception of the applicant. I've already applied in other states. I've already received my license there. But other than that, there's really no difference between the application process other than the fact that we have to receive endorsements from all of the states they're licensed in. So actually, it could take a little bit more time for an endorsement candidate to be licensed than for a CAPTE new graduate.
So they're still subject to California's verification of their
MPTE, education, and the
in fact, it
jurisprudence.
actually has another level to it, which is checking any other licenses that they already.
Exactly.
Okay, that's actually what I was looking for.
Is there a background check as well? Or
Absolutely.
Okay.
Has I believe it's the alternate pathway
Mm-hmm.
initiated where new applicants, new graduates would apply through FSBPT?
No, and so you might remember at the last board meeting that I reported, FSBPT cannot provide to us alternate pathway as a product because California cannot adhere to the eligibility requirements.
Thank you for the reminder.
So someone applying by endorsement is, that's still the same application fee, the same structure?
Correct.
Everything about that's the same? Okay.
Correct. And there's an offset there, and so the offset in cost is while we might spend more time verifying their endorsements from other states, they typically have an MPT score that's much more accessible to us, where for a normal CAPTE accredited applicant, there's a period of time that we're maintaining that application awaiting their first or second sit of the examination. So they kind of balance out.
I have more of an observation than a question for you today. The chart on page 309 of the agenda book shows the number of applications received and license issued and how it's ever increasing over time, which I think justifies even further our need to increase our resources and to pursue a restructure. So that's more of an observation than anything
I
else.
certainly appreciate that observation. I'm sure this board is probably tired of hearing me preach that the caseload per analyst is becoming unbearable, you know, at that point. And so we're doing everything we can to mitigate that.
Thank you. Any further discussion from the board on the applications report? Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
And the licensing services report. Is that you as well? Okay. We did such a great time the first time. We're going to have you back and finish this one too.
Thank you. Never mind that I got up and walked away. Okay, so for the licensing portion of it, same rules apply. I'm looking, we have data from the 2016-17 year compared to the 2015-16 year, in addition to a 5-year comparison. The number of active licenses from the physical therapists and physical therapy assistants has increased, and more of it being an increase from the physical therapy assistants that increased about 13%. Of the comparison over the 5-year period, there's been a significant increase in licensing applications, active licensing applications. The rate of inactive physical therapists, PTs and physical therapy assistants has decreased overall about 10% in a 5-year period. The retired license status has also continues to grow as people are using that status now, where I guess they haven't before. So that's something that we continue to see. We don't quite have 5 years data for that, but we do have data collected from 2014. And that's kind of all I have for licensing. If there's any other questions?
Any discussion on the board on this agenda item? I have no questions or observations on this. Anything to add, Jason?
There's one point on there that I just want to kind of shout out to Breeze for, and that's the decline in miscellaneous transactions. Because of the design that this board implemented in Breeze, address changes can be incorporated into other transactions, so it makes it much more convenient. So there are less people that are coming to the board and processing an address-only change. Now we allow them to change their address at the point of renewal, or any other transaction for that matter. So that point, it's one of those points of efficiencies that I can actually say, Breeze.
Thank you.
So the continuing competency audits, that will continue?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. The continuing competency representative is here with us, and she reminds me every day that it will continue. So not only for licensees, but we're starting now to build the criteria to audit recognized approval agencies. So I think they're probably about 80 to 90% done with the collection of that data. And so you may see in the near future results from that as well. And you've seen a couple, removals of recognition as a result of that data collection.
Great. Well, hearing no further discussion from the board, is there any public comment? Okay. That's
I'm
it.
leaving
I
for
promise.
overtime.
Thank you so much. All right, I think I'm going to take these items a little bit out of order so that when Elsa comes up, she can just stay up. Oh, public comment, please.
We divided licensing and continuing comp, so can continuing comp be reported on now?
Oh, absolutely. Come on
Absolutely.
in. Sorry, apologies for my oversight.
Our apologies on us too for the confusion.
Hi, good afternoon.
Good afternoon. I'm Veronica, Staff Services Analyst with the Continuing Competency Program. And the first thing that I'll be reporting today is on the audits. We are currently conducting quarterly audits, and a random selection of 10% is being selected of the eligible renewing population. For quarter 4, we currently don't have any numbers to report, as those are being worked on at the moment. So we'll be able to report at our next board meeting.
Okay.
However, for quarter 3, we did have a significant number of licensees that complied. There was a 93 passing rate for PTs and 95% for PTAs.
That's a great
It really
passing rate.
was. Hopefully it continues to be
Yeah.
a little bit better, but in that path.
And refresh my memory, is that 10% of our total licensee population that's audited each year?
It's of the eligible renewing population. So those
Okay.
licensees in inactive status, those type of statuses will be excluded from
see.
the selection.
Retired status and all that, yeah.
Right,
Okay.
right. And just moving on, we are still working on updating information for all of our recognized approval agencies. We currently have 137 approved agencies and 13,816 approved courses. So it's about 1,045 different difference in courses from our last board meeting. So there was an increase there. We still have agencies that have not responded to our request to report information to us. So if we don't hear back from them shortly, those will be brought before the board at our next board
Okay.
meeting for withdrawal of their recognition.
Okay.
And the final thing that I wanted to report was we're working with the Breeze team to automate the process in the unit, since everything's currently done manually.
I
It's
see.
going to take some time, but it's at least something that the program's working towards.
Okay.
Mhm.
Is Breeze helping at all in distinguishing who's eligible for a continuing competency audit?
We are
versus-
running, it's a report that we're running that is capturing who's eligible, and then we're manually selecting it's an Excel spreadsheet that does a random selection for
It's
us.
like the lottery.
Right.
The short answer is no.
Okay.
Breeze doesn't help us. We're doing it exactly the way we did it when we did it in Legacy.
Mhm.
I see,
So.
okay.
But they're working on that.
Yeah, we definitely are. Hopefully in the near future it's implemented.
Now, once they're audited and they pass successfully, is that captured in Breeze? for-
It is. We are
okay.
manually entering that information in the system for it to be captured. So when they're selected, it's being entered, and then when they pass or failed, either
Mhm.
way, it's being entered onto Breeze.
And how soon would they be eligible for another audit?
Well, actually, the next renewal cycle.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So
It's like
once-
jury duty.
it really is.
Okay, cool.
That's
Any-
all that I have to report.
Any questions from the board or discussion about CCs? I'm looking forward to hearing about those approved vendors and if they respond or not, so.
Yeah, there's not too many that are still left, but there's still some out there that just have not responded, and we've made almost every attempt that we possibly can to reach them, and we just haven't received a response.
Perhaps if you pretend you're a customer instead of the board, they'll
Right,
respond.
maybe that would make a difference.
Sometimes that's what brings them to our attention,
Oh,
is
interesting.
that a licensee is not able to get a hold of the recognized approval agency.
Okay. All right.
All right.
Thank you,
guys.
Veronica.
All righty.
Okay, we'll do agenda item number 24 at this time, the probation monitoring report. Hi, Monty.
Good afternoon, board members. Monty Martin, probation monitor. Today I'm reporting on the fourth quarter stats for the 2016-2017 fiscal year for probation. At the end of that quarter, which ended June 30th of this year, we had 88 licenses on probation for various causes. We changed the way we were defining tolling as well. From now on, for reporting reasons, tolling will now just include people who are licensed here in California but currently practicing out of state. So if you're in California and you're not practicing, you're still being counted as people here on probation. With that being said, there's currently 88 licensees on probation within the state. 80 of those are working in the state. Actually, there's 88 on probation. 80 of those are in the state, and there's an additional 8 which are currently tolling out of state. Also, within that quarter, there were 4 licensees that completed probation, and 3 were either revoked or surrendered. We are currently running at 20 licensees of that 80 in our drug and alcohol recovery monitoring program, making up 25% of that probation, of our probationers being in that program. Our population, that's the word I was looking for. Any questions about any of that?
Under quarter one, I see the 4 with an asterisk.
Yes, one participant died or became deceased during that quarter.
Oh, there it is, okay.
Yeah.
Wow, large font, and I missed it.
Any other comments from the board?
Just more interest, so what do we do when
Mike?
what do we do when a participant dies? Do we send out a notice? Do we say condolences? What
We
do
treat it very similarly to if a licensee were to pass away as well. So we're going to need a death certificate to remove their record and complete the process of removing it from the Breeze system. It's a little bit easier for Monty because he has a lot more contact with his probationers, so he finds out much sooner than, say, licensing services would about a licensee who might have filled out their renewal a couple of years ago, and then we are notified by a family member or a widow or something like that, but the process itself is similar.
Any other board discussion on this agenda item? I'm glad to see that you're monitoring less than 100 people now, so congratulations.
Well, I have some more that I've added since this.
Oh.
Yeah.
Okay, that was a little premature then. Well,
And again, it probably seems opportune, and I'll just stack it on, but that is also too many people to monitor
Yeah,
for a single probation monitor. So,
it's a lot.
just saying.
All right, well, that concludes the probation monitoring report. Thank you, Monty. Now let's have the Consumer Protection Services report, agenda item number 23. And also, I think we're going to transition right into guideline language after this. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon again. So with this being the end of the fiscal year, I feel like I'm sitting on the floor. I have one extra report in here, but we'll go ahead and start first with the Consumer Report Services report. And for this year, we noticed that there was an increase of 7% of the number, 9% increase in the number of complaints received. And we continue to have an increase in the number of convictions, which is sad. There was a 7% increase for the year of number of convictions. However, I do like to point out, I've indicated in the briefing paper, that we have had a 27% decrease in the average days to complete the investigations, and then a 30% decrease to complete cases transmitted to the AG's office. So that alone speaks for the staff as to their dedication and hard work that they do. Attachment 2 is the enforcement performance measures, and this is quarter 3. Last meeting, Q3 was not available. So again, at this meeting, Q3 is available, but the end of the year, quarter 4, is not available. So that will be presented at the next board meeting. So we're a quarter behind with presentation of the performance measures. The additional attachment that I have for you, since being that it's the end of year, it's the 5-year performance measures. And this report, for these 5 fiscal years, it does reflect that we have had a decrease in the cycle time to close cases without discipline, and also in the time to close with discipline. And Jason and I were discussing this the other day, and if you look at the 5 years, the 14-15 was really high as far as the average time to complete these cases, and then it's now coming down. It's finally starting to show in 16-17. Our numbers are finally starting to decrease. And with CPEI, which started at 2010-11, it had just started, it was brand new, and so you really don't start seeing any of the changes until years on down the road. And so now we're finally starting to see that. So hopefully we continue on and with the decreases as far as average times to complete cases. And I also pointed out the AG's office has made a lot of new processes to improve their timeframes, which I think at next board meeting, we're gonna try to have Gloria Castro do a presentation, because they also now are required to do performance measures. So she can explain to you what all they've done to improve their processes to meet those measures. Any questions?
Yeah, PM4, I was a little bit, it says 554 days
Which one are you looking at?
on the
Sorry.
5-year performance measure milestone, the cycle time discipline,
Mhm.
and then on the, I think this is from the BRE system, where we say actual average is 668 days. What is it the same measure? It looks like.
On PM4?
Yes. It's actual average 668 days, and then we go into the 5-year performance, and it goes to 554. Or was that quarter versus, average annual.
These are all annual.
Right.
The 5-year, these are annual.
Okay. And then this is the quarter. The breeze number in PM4 is the quarter. The third quarter.
You're talking about the graphics that are provided by DCA? Yeah, that's correct. And that's not the fourth quarter, it's actually the third quarter, because that's the one that she was referencing that we're 1 quarter behind on.
Yes. So we will see the new average
With quarter 4.
quarter 4. Okay.
Any further discussion from the members? Thank you for the clarification, teaching. Hearing none, let's head back into guideline language, agenda item number 12B.
They're all leaving.
Is it something I said?
Hey, now you know how I feel.
They know how the fighting is.
Language, yeah.
Yeah, back to the language.
So we're on page 74, I believe, is where we left off.
Agenda item.
119,
Thank you. You know what I meant.
agenda book, page
Thank you.
119.
Thank you.
123, agenda page 123, the guidelines, page 74.
74, I'm sorry. I missed the 4.
I think we're on page 75.
Okay, so on 75, your determination on return to practice, that's what I was kind of thinking of when I was saying I felt like cease to practice needed something else.
Oh,
That's what
okay.
this is.
Nice. Yeah, it was a very lengthy process to just kind of work it out between Elsa and Monty and myself, and then also with the help of Tara and Sawa, but I should have picked up on that earlier.
This part, the determination of return to practice was part of the clinical diagnostic evaluation. And I think this is where we separated everything to make it clear.
Mm-hmm.
So it's there. Okay, 76? 77? 78?
Wait now, slow down. On page 77, in X, biological testing, what's struck there is but not to exceed. And so I just made a note, if it can't exceed that, then why even have a 2 number? Like, let me see
I
if
think that was really just an attempt to try and simplify the language a little bit, to just demonstrate the range, but if it has value, there's not a problem with putting it back in.
Well, the note said cannot establish
Yeah.
a maximum number of tests.
Because the way it read with but not to exceed, we were putting a maximum, and we can't establish a maximum.
So why have a number at all? If it's, why say to 104? Because that's still.
I see the point.
You have the guidelines, Tara? The uniform standards? Yeah, I'm There's a reason to wear madness,
I'm
Tara.
sure there is. not quite as mad as you.
It's in number 4.
So I'm looking at uniform standard number 4. And there, it does provide a testing frequency schedule. Interestingly, it says the minimum range of 36 to 104 tests identified in level 2, which is part of a table.
I think it's down under the table.
Right, I'm actually reading the asterisk to the table. And the asterisk explains that in level 2, which is the second year of probation, the minimum range of 36 to 104 tests identified in the second year is for the second year of probation or diversion and each year thereafter up to 5 years. I'm not seeing that there is a limitation on a maximum range. And the uniform standard specifically indicates that the minimum range of 36 to 104 tests is appropriate. So I guess I'm wondering if they were thinking when they wrote this that they were really just providing a range of between 300 or 36 and 104 tests rather than specifying there's a minimum range of what could be 104 tests as the beginning number.
So a minimum range.
Well,
Would
the other,
36 be the minimum, though?
No, the range itself, or the minimum, is within that range. So this doesn't, I think this implies that you could
have
be
more.
subject to more than 104.
And the only time that I've heard where we've tried to rationalize more than 104 is when there's some reasonable suspicion to think that there's activity that needs to be accounted for, but we are already at that ceiling and we're worried about running out of tests before the end of the year. But I think that that's our interpretation, similar to Dr. Dominguez's comment, is that the minimum range is a starting point, and that starting point ranges from 36 to 104. But the probation monitor has the authority at any time to have his probationer provide a bodily fluid test with reasonable suspicion.
So suffice to say that removing the language but not to exceed does conform with the uniform standard language itself.
I guess I don't understand how a minimum range works. Because if it could be 80, the minimum's still 36.
I think that in the creation of the standards themselves, because you had so many different healthcare boards involved, that one board might feel that a certain practitioner's minimum could be 36, while another more responsible or more autonomous practitioner might be required to do the 104. And so the legislature, in their wisdom, created that minimum range for us to work with.
Is the minimum range listed for year 1 something significant to just this board? Because the language says for year 1, between 52 and 104. And the 36 to 104 ranges for year 2 and afterwards.
In the guidelines, it's significant to just this board, but it conforms to the uniform standards that apply to all of healthcare practitioners. I'll try not to comment on how it was applied by other boards. If they were following the standards, they'd be using the same one past first year scale. So there's an assumption that after first year with full compliance, Monty could allow a probationer to reduce the frequency of BFTs required. And we typically do.
Are we okay with that deletion? Is the board comfortable with the removal of but not to exceed? Hearing no objections, we'll accept that change.
78. 79.
I don't think this is a minor change. On 79, condition C, first bullet.
Hold on, I'm not on condition Z?
Yeah,
Okay, 79.
in the first bullet,
Uh-huh.
I think we need to remove license. That's something that we had
Oh,
discussed to add, but in reality, it should just be respondent's history in general is being reviewed,
Okay.
not just their license
License
history.
Thank you, Tara.
80. 81. 82.
So 82, this is all new.
This is all new. This is language that we're recommending is used for the orders, for different types of decision and orders.
I don't want to be the one to say this, but I have trouble with the word disciplining. And should it just be discipline of a license?
Mm.
Or a licensee? Because it's not, we're not disciplining the license, we're disciplining the licensee.
Actually, you're disciplining the license. It's the only nexus to jurisdiction that you have. And so without it, no discipline applies to the person. So as a condition of licensure, these are the things that we're applying as a result of discipline to the privilege of licensure.
Okay.
But I do agree with the discipline instead of disciplining.
I wonder if it might be better to stay consistent with this section, which refers to placement of a license on probation and reinstatement of a license. So effectively for the first two terms, starting with disciplining of a license, instead maybe it should just be probation with conditions and then probation without uniform standards.
Works.
Yeah, that works.
Sorry, Elsa, under the same surrender of license number 2, so we use typically either gender neutral terms or his and her. And so on number 2, respond at the end, respondent shall cause to be delivered his wallet license. Either, I would suggest we also include or her or
Or
there?
there.
It was part of a discussion yesterday as a
Oh,
global
sorry.
change, but absolutely.
Okay, that's it. Thank you.
It's in number 5 also.
Okay. 83? $84? $85?
Can you explain on 84 the circumstance that that would be used? It seems like it has two processes going on.
Unfortunately, it's only a single process, so that's the initial probationary license. We would use that language in the event that an applicant had criminal history that we still felt that we could, through the use of conditions in a probationary term, issue an initial probationary license. The due process for the applicant at that point would be to adhere to that order, but at the same time contest it, and the board would file a statement of issues.
Okay, so if I'm reading it right, it says they will get an unrestricted license upon completion of all licensing requirements, provided all the requirements are completed within the effective date of the decision. If it's not done within a year, then they're gonna get a revoked and stayed license.
So I think this is the one that we were using for ALJs, where the determination had been made that the exam isn't fulfilled yet, or the jurisprudence exam is not fulfilled yet.
Yes.
As part of the application process, sometimes we become aware of criminal history before all of the licensure requirements are met. And so this is to cover that issue that we've had in the past where we've denied the license has been contested, a statement of issues was filed, an administrative law judge overturned the denial and issued the license even though the actual licensure requirements hadn't been met. We're hoping that this paragraph helps ALJs avoid that confusion. So we've actually had decisions written by ALJs where the MPT hadn't been taken yet.
Okay, so then in that case, if the person takes it, then they get an unrestricted license.
Correct. Assuming that the board is not going to non-adopt that ALJ's decision or so on and so forth.
Okay, so if there was criminal history of some kind, then what this says is, okay, you've got criminal history, but if you get your NPTE, we're gonna give you an unrestricted license. But if it takes you more than a year, then that license is gonna be revoked and you're gonna be on probation. And that's where I'm not sure I'm reading it right.
The intent of this, and if it's not reading what we're trying to say, so the license will be issued, providing all requirements are done. And we want them to complete any requirements that are, that remain within 1 year. But we don't mean to say that if they do finish it within 1 year, they're gonna get an unrestricted license.
They are.
Yeah.
Oh, that's what it sounds
That's-
like it says.
Okay, and that's what we don't want to
Wondering-
say.
Why it says unrestricted? Because then the last sentence says upon issuance, said license shall be immediately revoked. does unrestricted belong?
This is when the initial license is denied. And the initial license is denied, and now we're in the part 2 of this process.
Yeah, so it's, you have to read it in its entirety to capture the sequence. So it would be issued unrestricted into the system, and then upon issuance shall immediately be revoked and revocation stayed. I think that's just for clarity of understanding, because it's what happens in the background. The license is issued before we can issue it with, any kind of penalty or decision or order attached.
If the sentence that starts, if a license is not issued within 1 year, would that work as the last sentence in that paragraph and still do?
Oh. Yeah, actually, I think it makes it clearer too.
Okay.
So move it to the last sentence.
If that's what you meant.
Mm-hmm.
That'll look better.
So then that makes sense then. So
Yep.
they didn't have their NPTE, they get that, the license is issued, then revoked, then placed on probation. But you're saying this has to happen in a year, or else you're gonna have to start over with the application process.
Correct.
I think putting the sentence at the end will do.
Yeah. And we have had that experience where administrative law judge ordered a license issued before requirements were actually met, and it was rather messy to have it corrected. So.
All right.
85. '86. 87.
I had a question about the first definition for surrender of license. The paragraph, or whatever you want to call that, ends with "the right to practice is ended." I thought we were using more of the term "privilege to practice," but it's semantics. I can go either way.
I'll let legal counsel opine. I think while it is a property right, I think both words are usable. And while I'd like to think licensure is a privilege, I don't know if that's more of an opinion than a legality.
If nobody feels passionately about it, we can keep it the way it is.
I always think it's helpful to see how another board has crafted the wording of that. And I know this morning when I was going crazy about preparing for this meeting, I bookmarked. It was the medical board.
I'm going to miss you, Tara.
I'm very honest about my moments of crazy. So I either need a moment, or you can continue through the rest of the document and come back to me.
Would like to continue? 88. 89. 90. 91. 92. 93. 94. And 95.
That wasn't so bad.
It really wasn't.
I don't know the state of where we are with these, but I'm thinking now if some of those terms get renamed, reordered, whatever they get designated, I think it would be helpful then, either as a board or as a review for us to make sure that the terms,
Correspond.
yeah,
Mhm.
but that was something I definitely didn't give enough attention to, because I knew things were gonna be changing, and it was hard to even reference that.
So would you like to look at it one more time before we approve it?
No, I
No.
think we can't
Okay.
until things get, it's not even,
At a point.
information's not there yet.
Okay.
Oh, you didn't mean today.
Right.
I thought you did, I'm like, oh, no. Yes.
Okay.
Page one.
Yeah. Yes.
Okay.
But I don't know what that means for the process.
So if you want to do that, you'll have to come back to the November meeting. So the rulemaking process won't start yet.
Mhm.
I can do all of the edits of everything that was done today. Send it back out for next board meeting.
Mhm.
I will also go through the terms and see if I see anything that's, because I did catch the real obvious ones, the aiding and abetting ones.
Mhm.
But I didn't go through each and every one of them.
Okay.
I can go through them as well.
Great.
On the briefing paper, in the action requested, it's just mostly somebody delegating, or the president delegating to the executive officer and staff to make the edits and to bring it back to the November meeting for additional review.
Okay, I move that we delegate to the staff and the executive officer to make the changes that the board had determined today with the assistance of legal counsel for us to review again at the November meeting. Did that capture it?
So I have a note regarding surrender of license on page 87. I think it might be more appropriate to revise the final sentence to really just state that the licensee can no longer practice. That way we just avoid the conversation entirely with respect to whether it's a right or a privilege, yeah. So then it just becomes one sentence. The licensee turns in the license, subject to acceptance by the board, comma, and the licensee may no longer practice, period.
Would it be helpful at that point also to add a little to the definition, similar to where we have in the authority, where it's not just practice physical therapy, but also anything that licensure entails, whether it be consultation or what have you, using that same similar definition? Either provide or assist in the provision of, physical therapy services. Right, yeah.
I think we should include that, be more clear.
Well, I think if we're going to do that, then potentially we have to look at the definition of suspension, because that is also about prohibition from practicing.
Yeah, I think at that point I would, as part of kind of a global change, replace the word practicing with that standard definition. Well, not definition, but standard phrase. Prohibited from practicing or providing for or assisting in, I can't think of it off the top of my head, but.
Is there an example of the language you're
Yeah,
thinking?
let me see if I can look it up. See, I should have just been quiet.
To answer Jason's original question, I do think that it is a right to practice. So. And I don't know if the decision here to whether to amend this language is dependent on that. So.
Were the tables useful to you? Would you like something similar to that with all of the conditions for each section, or does it matter?
Which tables?
The tables that were sent to you with the codes that were deleted.
Oh, yeah, they were really helpful. I took a look at those, definitely.
Specifically.
Let's see. References, there you go, medical board codes. Yeah, I'll be honest, I really didn't use the tables,
Okay,
but
that's fine.
if somebody else used it and benefited from it, I
You're
would hate
killing me.
for you to remove it just for me. Is it helpful for you, though, to track? I mean, is that something
I thought
you're
it would be
using
helpful
anyway?
for you, but if
Okay.
it wasn't, then
Okay.
I won't.
Yeah.
So,
Say too bad.
while I was
Right.
taking a look at the suspension provision, I missed the motion on item, what is it, 612? 12B, yeah, what's the motion? Could you read that back?
Well, there wasn't real, well,
I'll just try to reiterate it. Is this the one that I just made before you suggested?
Right,
definition
so
change?
with respect to the guidelines,
Okay.
is that,
I moved that we delegate to the, oh, you have it for me? Is this the?
yeah.
Okay.
So it seems like we reached the point that we made most of the substantive changes to the guidelines. So at this point, it seems appropriate if the board is willing to then just move forward with the rulemaking. So that's what this motion contemplates, is that it's the board would be approving the package for the 45-day notice and beginning the rulemaking process.
sorry, Tara, while you were
yeah.
researching,
Right,
we're not gonna go forward with the rulemaking
Okay.
just yet.
right, that's why I was being really long-winded about what this motion was about to do, so that's what I needed to know.
So I don't need this,
So,
right?
yeah,
Okay.
so the board wants to see the guidelines again in November?
Yes, just to make sure that the things line up, all the letters and, yeah, the terms. Okay. So maybe we should wait for Jason to pull up the language and then I'll.
I have it. It's similar to what we use in the retired application process, and that's prohibited from engaging in the practice of or assisting in the provision of physical therapy.
And we're adding that to the definition of surrender and suspension?
Correct.
Are there any other license types where that would be, other than retired, where that would be appropriate to include?
Inactive
Inactive, okay. So that's the global
or
change.
suspended.
Or-
Give me a second.
Okay.
Delinquent.
Mhm.
Canceled, revoked, or deceased.
So those are all in the glossary as well? We're making the change to each one of those?
Yeah, we would find where we use the word practice, and we would just make that further, use that phraseology in replacing the word practice with also assisting in.
Does that prevent someone that was revoked from being an aide?
That's a good point.
And could you?
Assistive personnel. You couldn't prevent, not without a court order. Might discourage.
That's one of those issues that I would want to report back to the board on, because to the extent, there's public protection to be had because someone has lost their license for sexual misconduct with a patient, and now they're acting as a PT aide that doesn't require licensure. What procedures exist that would allow an authority, if it's not the board, to intervene. And I don't know off the top of my head what that is, so.
I can tell you from a point of frustration that not much, if any. We've run into that problem before.
So just, maybe I don't know, we might want to poll the board and see what their thoughts are, but for going forward with the rulemaking package, that could begin, because it's not we still have the ability to continue to finalize that, or should we be at the point that we feel like this is what's going forward?
I would like to be as assured as possible and have the board be confident with that language, instead of having to make, changes throughout the regulatory package.
Makes it easier.
So is that, then I think I would feel more comfortable waiting to see it again?
Mhm.
Okay.
So does my initial motion still stand, or now we have more amendments?
I retract my recommendation of assisting in the provision of, or any of those
Okay.
kind of things, so.
Okay. All right. Do we have a second
Remind us again, please.
of the motion? Sure. I move that we delegate the authority to staff and the executive officer to make the revisions that the board has agreed to today, and for us to see the revised version of the guidelines, the 6th edition of the guidelines at the November meeting. And to make technical, non-substantive changes. Thank you.
So there was a motion, and I think I heard a second.
Oh, there was a second? Well, it was, okay. Second by Mr. Watkins. Any further board discussion? Any public comment? Can we have a roll call vote? All those in favor?
Katerina Ellaby,
Aye.
Alicia Benayemen. Alicia Benayemen is absent. Deborah Alviso,
Yes.
Jesus Dominguez,
Aye.
Daniel Drummer,
Aye.
Tanya McMillian,
Aye.
TJ Watkins.
Aye.
Thank you.
All right, thank you, Brooke. And it looks like we have some time, Jason. Should we go on a break for you to load up the CLEAR training?
Yes, please.
So we'll take a 15-minute recess. We'll reconvene at 4 p.m. The board member training, and it is the Council on Licensure, Enforcement, and Regulations, Introductory to Regulatory Governance.
So again, I'd like to welcome everyone to today's CLEAR Introduction to Regulatory Governance webinar. Today's module, Foundations of Occupational and Professional Regulation. Thank you so much for joining us today. And it's my pleasure to introduce our speaker. Deanna Williams is the president of Dundee Consulting Group and the risk officer for the Retirement Homes Regulatory Authority. She is a pharmacist with experience in both hospital and community practice, policy work within Ontario's Ministry of Health and Long-Term Care, and most recently, regulatory leadership within the Ontario College of Pharmacists, 1994 to 2011. In 2012, Deanna was appointed by Ontario's Minister of Health and Long-Term Care the supervisor to the College of Denturists of Ontario, a post she held until regulatory authority was granted back to that college in late 2013. Deanna has served on the Finance and Audit Committee, St. Michael's College, University of Toronto, and on the Board of Directors of CLEAR, serving as president in 2003 to 4. She is a member of Ireland's International Advisory Committee on Pharmacy and chair of the board of Holloman War Memorial Hospital in Dunnville, Ontario. So with that, I'm pleased to turn the presentation over to Deanna today. Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Stephanie, and welcome everybody. I hope that you'll enjoy this series. This is the first module of 5 that speak to regulatory governance and board member training. So the first module, just to put it into some context, is really a high-level overview of the foundations on which occupational and professional regulation in Canada, U.S., and around the globe are built. And the next 4 modules will spend a little bit more time and give you more detail about your role and responsibility as board members as it relates to the 4 kind of key regulatory themes. And those are governance, our rulemaking, how we do that, your role with respect to professional discipline, and then assessing competence. So that's just to give you a little bit of what we're going to talk about today. And again, kind of a high-level overview. So when we look at the history of professional and occupational regulation, it's a long one. We have a very, very long history that can be traced back really as far as 10th century England, when they established what we call guilds. And the guilds were originally established sort of to look after the professions in all senses. So to kind of advocate for the professions on the one hand, but then to deal with the professions if something went wrong on the other. So the guild system lasted for an awfully long time. It still exists in some jurisdictions today. But in the 17th century, in the United States, Virginia, really took the first sort of step forward to regulate in the sense that we kind of see it today. And that had to do with medical fees. And so it was kind of interesting that the concern was less about patient safety at that time, but more about the excessive fees that doctors were seen to be charging their patients. And it evolved into the sort of more 18th century. In New Jersey, the Board of Medicine was established. The Law Society of Upper Canada was established in the late 1700s. And then the health professions and other professions followed from there. The other interesting thing when you look at sort of the history and where it's led us is that there are supposedly over 3,000 professions or occupations that are regulated worldwide, and in North America by 1 or more states or provinces. But it's very interesting that only a couple of dozen of these are commonly regulated in every jurisdiction. So I think that that's an interesting thing just to hold on to as we go forward. Now, while the primary mandate for all of us as regulators is common, and that is really clearly from a legislative and regulatory standpoint, is the mandate to serve and protect the public interest. But what happens and what you see if you, interact with regulators in other jurisdictions is that the terminology that we all use, even though our mandate is the same, really does differ from jurisdiction to jurisdiction and from profession to profession. So the names and terminologies vary. Those of us who are from North America these won't be strange to us. We have boards, we have colleges, commissions, agencies, departments, state departments. And then in some other jurisdictions, they may be called like a court and it may be called a tribunal. But it's important just to keep in mind that when we are talking regulators, even though there's some things that are very similar, terminology can be different, and it's our responsibility as board members to kind of understand what those are so that we can make the right sort of relationships and processes work. When you look at the locations, again, this varies. We have states, commonwealths, provinces, jurisdictions, districts, territories, and with international reaches, and there's so many congresses and conferences now that bring regulators from around the world together, and collaboration that happens between regulators, it really can be a challenge for us as board members to get that terminology right so that we really understand it. And these are terms that are used in some jurisdictions, but not all, but it's good to keep on your radar screen. And we have the regulatory recognition is another area where terminology can be a bit tricky for board members, particularly as it relates to licensing. A number of regulators around the world are engaged in mobility agreements. They are engaged in some kind of understanding to ensure portability of registrants or members from across around the world or in different jurisdictions. So it does matter. It's important to know whether a credential or a license in one jurisdiction is in fact what will meet your requirements in your own. And who we license and what we provide to them does vary. Some jurisdictions, registrants are called registrants, sometimes members, and licensees. And what we give them at entry to practice or when they're initially make the entry to practice cut is licenses, certificates of registration permits, and so on. So it's just an example of how regulatory terminology can make a difference and how important it is as board members to understand what we're talking about. Now, the rationale for regulation, regardless of terminology, if we are a regulator, we do have that common and sole purpose to protect the public from harm. And, when governments and other powers that be look and try and decide whether or not a profession or an occupation needs to be regulated, risk of harm is usually one of the very first things that they consider. So if you had an unqualified or unregulated person doing this practice or this job, is risk of harm to the public likely? And there's no question that the public has come to rely on us as regulators to judge a professional's qualifications and to say and give us assurance that if we register somebody that they are safe and competent. A more recent attention, I think, in the rationale for regulation has been paid to critical mass or size of the profession that's being regulated. And, that has a lot to do, especially in the professions that are autonomous with respect to funding. How much does it take to be an effective and credible regulator? And so I think there's another look at size and does that matter. And then there is a cost to regulation. And some feel that are the benefits to the public greater than the potential for the costs. And so looking at alternate ways to achieve public protection, we're going to talk a little bit about some of those going forward, is another thing that comes into this whole piece about rationale. Now, when you look at the pros and cons of professional or occupational regulation, the skeptics certainly will say many of those things that are on the right-hand side of the screen, that, the regulators only just restrict entry into profession, the cost of our regulation is too high, and the benefits are kind of iffy. It can decrease competition or innovation. And I think the last point about the lack of consistency, our skeptics will certainly say that there's too much inconsistency among regulators, even within the same profession. And one of the points where I think, for me, I've seen this, is in the quality assurance or continuing competency requirement, and that the public really does trust that as regulators we are making sure that whoever we register at the beginning is competent, but they want to also trust that we're doing something to make sure that they maintain a level of competence throughout the whole time they're on a register. And I think that it's fair to say even in my own jurisdiction, which is Ontario in Canada, even though the law requires all the health regulators to have continuing competency programs, there still are pretty wide variations in what those programs look like and what they are. So those are the sort of things that I think that our naysayers or skeptics say. But when you look at the pros, I mean, clearly, collectively, by the standards that we set and the standards that we enforce, that we are here to raise the bar within practice, ensure quality of service. And I think the last point I just want to mention that, preventing fraudulent and unethical behavior, well, my experience, as a regulator, you can never guarantee that one of the people that we register aren't going to do something that's fraudulent, unethical, or unsafe. But what we can do, and this is, I think, a real pro, is that we do have the opportunity as regulators to act in as timely a manner as we can and in an open and transparent way to try and address things as they happen. And I think that is a really key point as a board, is to make sure that we are doing everything that we can do, so that when something bad happens, we can act swiftly in the public interest. Now, regulators are tasked with a number of things. One of them, of course, is setting and establishing rules, standards, and expectations, and then enforcing them. And the authority to set standards of practice, to make sure that if a complaint comes in that is being properly investigated, that there's some sort of oversight or role where something has to be disciplined or go through some sort of disciplinary proceedings, that the regulator is really accountable for that. Whether you do it yourself or whether you do it, it's done in a different way, there's still a line of accountability that needs to be there. And then making sure, again, that whatever we do from a continuing professional education standpoint is that there is some kind of check and balance to make sure that the registrants are keeping current and that they are lifelong learners. Now, across jurisdictions and across professions and occupations, there are some instruments or pillars, as they're called here, of regulation that really are common among all of us. So we're going to look at some of these, and here they are just listed, but I want to explore each one of them with you in a little more detail. So entry to practice, licensing and registration, renewing the license, maintaining a register, scope of practice or title protection, standards, continuing competence, continuing professional development requirements, complaints, investigations, and resolutions, discipline, conduct, competence or incompetence, and incapacity proceedings, and then public outreach. How do we let the public know that we're here, and then supporting or providing education and information to registrants and licensees so that they're clear as to what our expectations are. So let's look at licensing for a few minutes. I already mentioned this, that the public does expect us as regulators to make sure that when we issue a license or a certificate of registration or whatever it's called in your jurisdiction, that we are saying that someone has met our qualifications and they're qualified to be able to practice or work in the profession, and that they're safe and competent practitioners, that we have every reason to believe that they'll be able to practice in the way that would uphold our standards. And best practices today are really, from what I've seen around the world, is really about identifying or articulating the competencies that you believe should be required of a newly registered practitioner in your profession or occupation. And then testing to those competencies, both at the entry to practice level and then some form of an assessment on a continuing basis. So understanding as a board and somehow getting this message to the members or the registrants so that they are also engaged in the same way of thinking, that the time when you could be licensed for life, if you will, come into the profession and never have to open a book or do any kind of lifelong learning, those days are gone. And to inspire public confidence and trust, we have to make sure that we have qualified people practicing both at the front end and throughout the time that they're on our register. Registration renewal, again, depending on the jurisdiction, whether your registration fees are paid annually or whether they're paid on a cyclical basis, whether they're paid to the regulator directly or whether they're paid to government, which as they are in some jurisdictions. The time of the renewal when registrants are asked to recomplete or self-declare certain information or provide information to the regulator that could be the same or updated. It's a real opportunity for us as regulators to not only update information, but to actually collect and collate some information and data. And I think to consider and communicate as we start thinking about, fees and how much does it cost to regulate and how much are our registrants or members paying to be registered, to sort of consider as a board what the value proposition is of regulating a profession. And we know that the fees that registrants pay generally go to support the work of us as regulators. But from the professional standpoint or from the registrant standpoint, it also gives some professionals the right to practice certain activities, which would be kind of like a scope of practice that might be restricted only to registered members. Title protection, to call themselves something as opposed to, not. And the benefits of being part of a profession need to be communicated. So I think it's also a good opportunity when you're going through a renewal process and you're getting fees is to sort of think about what your messaging can be to show registrants that there actually is a benefit to them to be engaged in the registration as registrants and to support it. And the collective raising of the bar is, I think, a huge benefit to the profession and to the public. Continuing competence, again, in education, that's really about, again, maintaining that we have some kind of assurance that there's ongoing skills or upskilling as things change, that people aren't just staying where they were when they graduated or came into the profession, but there is an expectation. And one word about self-declaration, many regulators ask registrants to self-declare when they re-register or renew their license. But as regulators, we do have, I think, some obligation as well to verify self-declared information and make sure, and that's where assessments of some kind can come in very handy and be useful. We have an obligation to establish and maintain a register of regulated professionals. A public register in almost every jurisdiction is the expectation, not only to create a reliable list, but I think the public does rely on us as regulators to both keep and maintain up-to-date information that's easy to find and search, and that provides clear and meaningful and relevant information to them. And I think that there's no point putting something on the register and trying to be transparent if the information that's on there either can't be easily found by the public or when they do find it, they don't know what it means. So, and then they have to generate a call and say, I saw this about my practitioner, my pharmacist, for example, but I don't know what this means, and it should be very, very clear. The other question with respect to the register that I'd like to pose is, are we as regulators, are we as transparent as we can be? And when you look at public confidence and trust that we want to build and maintain as regulators, sometimes inconsistency, even among regulators in one jurisdiction, can sort of erode that trust because it causes confusion. And an example would be that if you have a section in your statute or your legislation that says these are only these things should be on the, you must put these things on the public part of the register, but it's silent on other things. Well, if half of the regulators in a jurisdiction say, well, it doesn't say we can't do it, so we're going to go ahead and put it on, and others say, well, if it doesn't explicitly say we can do it, we're not going to put it on, that causes a lot of confusion out in the public. So looking at, if it doesn't say that we can't, does it mean that we could or that we should? And as a board, I think it's important to ask those questions. There's very clear things that we can't disclose, but if we aren't precluded to disclose it, I'd ask the question, are you being as transparent as you can be? Scope of practice and title protection, again, I've mentioned this before, but in many jurisdictions, unless you're regulated, you would not be permitted by law to identify yourself as a certain professional or practice within the permitted scope of practice within that profession. So it really sets out, who's qualified to practice or not. Now, I do want to just mention that in some jurisdictions, regulators and regulated professions are not bound by a defined scope of practice, but are bound more by as a registered professional in this profession, you only do or what you know or ought to know you have the skills, ability, and judgment to do, and that you're permitted to do. So some go about it in a different way, but there needs to be some kind of a definition. So as a regulator, you have your boundaries, and the members know what those are as well. Standards, the public and the profession do look to us as regulators to set, and then also expect us to enforce standards, and they could be standards of practice, standards of behavior, conduct, ethics, and so on. And the standards that are expected of the profession have to be grounded in the profession, and the profession has to be able to do whatever standard a regulator says. These are the standards you have to follow. So it's very important that the profession can do them and that they are doing them. And there is some case law in Canada that would sort of lead you to the conclusion that prosecuting a registrant for failing to maintain a prescribed standard, if there's evidence that the profession either isn't able to do the standard or in fact isn't doing the standard, it calls into question then whether or not it is a standard. So you have to be really careful when you set standards. A lot of things sound really good on paper, but they really do need to be grounded in the profession that you're regulating, and there needs to be, people need to be able to do them, and so that you will have, success. And I think that that's a very important point. Now, complaints, investigations, and resolutions, when something goes wrong, the public does look to the regulators for redress. And sometimes people will say that the only time they know that a regulator exists is when something goes wrong. But the time that a complaint is made, from the time it's made to the time that resolution happens or a decision is rendered, that disciplinary action is going to happen, the perception of of the regulator is really very much impacted by the journey that the member of the public has as they go through our processes. So it does have a significant impact on our reputation, if you will, as are we seen as being facilitative, are we seen as being credible, are we seen as being consistent, are we seen as being fair. So it's really important that, yes, we have to have our processes in place and we have to have things properly screened and addressed, but there's other pieces about making the patient journey as easy and seamless and positive as possible. So as board members, sometimes just asking those questions, have we ever surveyed people who have lodged complaints with us and asked what they thought, what worked well, what didn't work well, where would you suggest there could be some improvements? It might be a very interesting exercise and give you some information as from a quality standpoint. In different jurisdictions, adjudication of discipline matters is handled in different ways. In Canada, the usual and customary process is that a member of a profession is disciplined in front of a panel of peers that also has representation from lay or public members. In some states, some jurisdictions, professionals go before administrative law judges, and in still other jurisdictions like Ireland and in the UK, there may be separate tribunals established or even high courts. But whatever the process is in your jurisdiction, I would say that you have to be really very, very conflicts and making sure that whatever process, that conflicts of interest and conflicts of role are addressed in anyone who's adjudicating these matters, and that your processes follow fair principles of fairness, objectivity, transparency, are as open as possible. If something is getting stuck and it's not going forward, being open and communicative about why that's happening, and very important that processes demonstrate consistency. And many lawyers have often said that consistent decisions tend to be more defensible ones. So you want to make sure that as board members, that the processes that you are essentially accountable for, even if you're not doing them exactly yourself, have those principles embedded in them. Now, public information and support, there's been a lot of sort of shifting where the regulator's role seems to have now included in many jurisdictions a responsibility to reach out to the public and let them know we exist. Not to just wait until a complaint or a problem comes up and then they start looking for us, but to actually proact and establish some kind of links. And, the question that you need to ask as board members is, how easy is it for the public to find us? How easy is it for the public to access information, to get a live person when they call in? Public outreach is very important to the regulator mandate, which is, that we're here to serve and protect the public interest. And I think it's worth also looking at how we report what we're doing beyond our annual report. So most regulators do have to submit some kind of an annual report or publish an annual report, which really have tended in the past to be a statistical report. But what could you do beyond that? And again, what could we do to be more transparent? Are there opportunities for us to increase transparency? So the only thing that I would just add here is that when you are reaching out to the public and you're telling them that you exist and why you exist and how you do your work, we just have to be very careful and thoughtful about not appearing that we're promoting the profession. And I know that some regulators have struggled with that in the past, so you want to keep that on your radar screen. Now, what about our registrants and licensees? And I talked a little bit about a value proposition. Some of us, I think, shy away from using the word support when it comes to our registrants or our professionals. But in the context of enforcing, rules that we expect, or, putting in standards and then saying this is what we expect from you, we really have to have a role in informing and educating registrants as to what those expectations are. And I think that there's a number of ways that you can do it, and that colleges or regulators do it. But there's a couple of things that might be considered examples where some regulators have sort of helped educate members. One is by putting in practice advisory staff or lines or chat rooms, or even website dedicated places where people can go into a website where registrants or licensees can actually call for advice in kind of a safe way. So they're going to call and say, this is what I've had happen. I can remember the days in pharmacy in Ontario where somebody would have had a problem and they weren't sure whether they should have done it or not. So they would call, and then they would be afraid that they now might get referred to a disciplinary process. And those days are gone. I think you have to be facilitative, and registrants have to feel that they can call and say, I have this in front of me. I'm not exactly sure what to do, or this is what I did, and now I'm starting to wonder if I did the right thing. And the other is to publish in your newsletters or whatever kind of outreach you use, even on the websites, case studies of maybe actual complaints that have come in or matters that have been disciplined, but not in the punitive sense, but to put them with the learnings. What can we all learn from this case? Because most professionals will, in fact, identify with some of the things that they see in cases and think, gee, that's happened to me, and I didn't, thank God I didn't get complained against. But it can be a real learning opportunity to publish some of these and then highlight what can we all learn from this. So there's a number of ways we can support and educate our licensees. So what's happening around the globe with respect to trends and factors? And when you're regulating in a jurisdiction, whether you're doing one profession or multiple professions under one umbrella, sometimes we have blinders on and we don't really understand or pay attention to what's happening around the world. But it's true that what happens in one jurisdiction very often influences what might happen in another. So I think what is common across the jurisdictions right now is that regulators are very much under microscopes. High-profile cases, some that are not so high-profile but that end up on the front page of a major newspaper. There's increased pressure on governments to implement oversight mechanisms for the regulators. A good example is the Professional Standards Authority, which is really audits and really reviews discipline decisions of the 9 healthcare regulators in the UK. In Canada, we have offices of the Fairness Commissioner in 4 provinces now. And they're mandated to really look at what the regulators are doing with respect to registration practices to make sure that they are fair and that we're not putting up barriers. So all of that is because of a perception that's out there that is increasing pressures that regulators need oversight. Some of the things, there's like sunset provisions, which in some of the states really is an auto-termination, if you will, automatic termination of regulatory boards or agencies unless legislative action is taken. Sunrise provisions are provisions that allow new professionals or occupations to come into the legislation. In some jurisdictions where the powers that be have deemed that they are not going to formally regulate certain professions, some have gone to what they call like a voluntary registration scheme as an alternative to being a full sort of established regulator. And then, you know, the safe systems of state regulation, state that really stands for standardized, so where appropriate things are standardized, accountability to the public, flexible, so able to be nimble and to adapt to things as they come up and as they change, and then being effective and efficient regulators. So there's a number of things that are happening, and I think as board members, you know, if you're not told what these are, you know, just asking, well, what are best practices in other jurisdictions, or could we look outside of what we're doing and see what we might be able to learn from others? And if you have a best practice, is there a way to share this with others? And certainly, you're all on a CLEAR call, but I know that the CLEAR is also acts in a way as a clearinghouse for some of the best practices for its members too. But anything like that to kind of, you know, get out what you're doing so others can learn from you, and trying to learn from others. And the internationalization of professions and occupations, this has really been happening, I would say, in the last 20 years or so. And it comes from trade agreements. You know, in North America, we've had the North America Free Trade Agreement. In Canada, in 1997, all the provinces and territories signed the Agreement on Internal Trade, which meant that there had to be free movement of goods and services, including professional services, across the country by 2001. The European Union agreements have resulted in pretty free movement of professional services throughout the countries, the EU countries, and there are many reciprocity agreements that exist all over the world. So between jurisdictions within Canada and the U.S. and other jurisdictions, and so on. I think it's done a couple of things. One is it certainly has increased the pressure on us all to kind of harmonize certain things. And one is it challenges us to let go as regulators of some of those things that we've always held near and dear, but we don't really, they really don't work in the, when you look at the portability and the need for movement. And so that would be focusing on commonalities, not on differences. Not putting so much on what schools someone graduates from, but rather do they have the competencies that we require for someone to practice or work in a profession or occupation here? And what are the outcomes? If we keep our eye on that ball, what are the outcomes that we really want? And that is that the public that these professionals or registrants serve have to be protected, and are we putting the emphasis on the right syllables? And I think as boards we have to start kind of thinking out of our box, our comfort zone, and thinking about some of those things. So just to sort of sum things up a bit, you know, while approaches to regulating professions and occupations may vary, and in fact do vary around the world, we have to keep really coming back to our common mandate, which doesn't change, and that is that we really are here. Public protection and public interest needs to be at the forefront of everything that we do. So the actions that we take, decisions that we make, and policies and procedures that we put into place. So we really are entrusted with a range of instruments. These are listed right here. I mean, ensuring the competence of the professionals that we have on our register, and again, not just at entry to practice, but also the whole time that they're registered with us, and then setting standards of practice that are appropriate and get us, really address those risks of harm. So, what are the risks we're trying to mitigate, and are the standards and requirements we have appropriate? Are they aligned? Are they going to give us what we're trying to do? And so as board members, you really need to be familiar with all of the tools that are available to you, and to the resources that really will help you do your job. And with that, I think I'm going to close and see if there's any questions. But I do want to thank you very much for being on the call today. It's great, and I'll be turning it over to Stephanie.
All right. Well, thank you. All right. I see a comment coming in saying thank you, Deanna, for an excellent presentation, and a question asking, can you suggest any reliable ways to validate or verify competencies rather than details of credentials?
Okay. Well, thank you for that, Wilma. Now, reliable ways to validate or verify competencies. And I just want to there's a couple of ways that I could sort of take this question. So why don't I give you my first, the way I think you mean it, and then if it's not, please let me know. When you go through a process to articulate competencies, they do have to be valid, and the way they're valid is that they're really grounded in the profession. So I have had a little bit of experience in sort of developing competency frameworks. Most often it's been in one profession across provinces. So for mutual recognition agreements, for example, get 10 different provinces in the room and come to an agreement on one national competency framework. But it does have to be validated, even though it sounds good to the regulators. The profession really does have to validate the competencies. So, because any kind of assessment that you do based on those competencies will not be a valid assessment unless that has happened, that process has happened. Now, to verify competencies rather than details of credentials, if you're talking about coming into a profession at an entry to practice level, then I think that there are methods, like one that I can think of is called PLAR, which is Prior Learning Assessment Review, and it takes a special skill set in there, and a lot of regulators, at least regulators in Canada, are using third-party organizations that do that. So for international applicants, for example, who don't come from accredited schools, maybe don't have quite the same credentials as someone who is educated here in North America, they will look at what credentials they do have and try and see if they don't exactly meet it, where are the gaps and how might those be addressed. Is that the sort of thing you're looking for, Wilma? Have I missed it?
Okay, she's saying yes.
Okay, great.
Good. All right. Well, thank you for that. I don't see any other questions in that chat just at the moment. I'll monitor that in the background in case anybody's in the process of sending something in. I certainly don't want to cut that off, but I'll kind of monitor that in the background as we get ready to close out here. So CLEAR would like to thank our presenter today and thank all of you for participating in this board member training Introduction to Regulatory Governance webinar. We hope that you enjoyed this presentation.
There's a rush on it. Everyone needs to take that.
Whether it's today or tomorrow, there's-
I don't think anybody after 5 is going to do anything with it anyway.
there's really, right, that's what I mean, there's nobody there to receive it.
Okay. Well, thank you, Jason, for that riveting training. It's always great to get a new perspective on what we do here as regulators.
And that's
I-
just one of many parts.
Oh, I am on the edge of my seat. But no, the international piece was really interesting. And,
Good.
you know.
Good.
Do board members have any comments on the CLEAR training that we just received? Hearing none, is there any public comment? All right, so wrapping up, we have agenda item number 25 left, public comment on items not on the agenda. Okay, agenda item number 26, agenda items for a future meeting. It's going to be on November 15th and 16th at Ohlone College.
That is
in
correct.
Newark. Any board discussion on that?
Not necessarily an agenda item, but would like to request, if possible, to have, we spent a great deal of time during this meeting, and we have in past meetings, with reviewing detail information that seems, in my mind, some of this could be reviewed and prepared ahead of time, and then a more complete package or a more prepared agenda item could be presented to the board to be able to deal with more of the content type issues that I think we should be addressing. And I'm wondering if that might be possible.
And which materials are you speaking?
Well, today, looking at an example is the disciplinary guidelines. And there were a great number of typographical, grammatical, other kinds of issues. There were specific things that council identified that things should have been worded differently or situated differently that weren't necessarily content pieces that the board should be deliberating. And I'm wondering if it would be possible to have council review items beforehand, before they're put into the agenda, or if that's not possible, some other way to try to get things in a little bit better shape before presented to us.
Absolutely.
The only note I'd make on this is that I think it's moving quickly, and we did look at it a couple times and then just ran out of time before the meeting, which we needed to get noticed with materials, et cetera. So I think they really do try to get it reviewed as much as possible. And this is just one of those we ran out of time. But I think your note earlier about reserving the minor and technical comments to offline is helpful, for sure.
And another item that comes to mind is some of the rulemaking review when things have been presented that I feel like we've gotten buried and stuck in a lot of minutia that didn't seem to be content and of great import to have for the board to have having to address at the time. So there's those kinds of things where we're plowing through large amounts, large numbers of pages and large amounts of information, where it would expedite things, in my mind, if we could do that.
And I think you're right, Daniel. I think the role of the board is more of a higher level than the weeds that sometimes we get stuck in at times. But nobody could knock us for not being thorough. So that's the good part. Any other items from other members? for consideration at future meetings?
I think I would just say some of it's the nature of the beast. I mean, ultimately, we have to approve those documents, and so no matter how well they might be affected, once they're read by by us, there might still be that same level of review needed.
We've discovered another point of review potential with the conversion from the Word to the PDF document, which accounted for a lot of today's kind of, triple space here or a misspelling here, that we shouldn't trust in the conversion process quite so much. And so there's a point of review there that could be done.
One of the things that might help, but would add time, would have been some of the new probation terms or changes to a format of one. If those were maybe dealt with as concepts,
Mm-hmm.
and then we'd be seeing them now, that might have changed because we were almost doing two things. We were really looking at a document and then talking about policy.
Sure, and I think we can make that a matter of the process moving forward, essentially. So as we discover new methodologies in the way of handling things, that each individual issue could be brought up at a meeting to be accounted in the next revision of the guidelines at a later date. And so we're all more familiar with it at that point.
Impact is
Again,